The dust hung thick in the Afghan air, turning the sunrise into something ancient and angry. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Garrett stood at the edge of Bagram Airfield, watching the last C-17 Globemaster being loaded with equipment that had taken 20 years to accumulate and would take only hours to abandon. Her hands rested on the Barrett M107 rifle slung across her chest, fingers unconsciously tracing the worn serial number she had memorized years ago. The metal was warm already despite the early hour, heated by a sun that had witnessed countless empires retreat from these mountains. 20 years. An entire generation of warfare reduced to pallets of gear being forklifted into cargo holds while Afghan security forces watched from the perimeter, their faces unreadable masks that could have meant anything from betrayal to relief. Sarah had been 8 years old when the towers fell, 18 when her father died in Fallujah, and now at 35, she was among the last Americans to walk this blood-soaked ground. The arithmetic of war never balanced, no matter how many times you tried to reconcile the ledger. Master Chief Petty Officer Marcus Holloway approached from her left, his footsteps deliberate despite the chaos of the withdrawal. At 55 years old, Doc carried himself with the kind of economy that came from 3 decades in uniform. Every movement purposeful, nothing wasted. His weathered face bore the map of 100 combat zones, lines carved deep around eyes that had seen too much death to ever sleep soundly again. He stopped beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, and for a long moment neither spoke. They watched the sun climb higher, burning away the dust, revealing the Hindu Kush mountains in their eternal indifference. "We are really leaving," Doc said finally. His voice carried no particular emotion, just stating a fact the way you might comment on the weather. 20 years and we are leaving like thieves in the night. Sarah turned the photo over in her hand, the one she kept tucked in her helmet band. Sergeant Tom Garrett, United States Marine Corps, grinning at the camera with the kind of confidence that comes from never having experienced true failure. Fallujah, 2004. He had been 32 in this picture, just 3 years younger than Sarah was now. He would never be older than 32. The mathematics of that fact still had the power to stop her breath when she thought about it too long. "We follow orders," she said, tucking the photo back into place. "The mission is over." Doc made a sound that might have been agreement or might have been something else entirely. "Your daddy would have hated this." He paused, seeming to taste the words before committing to them. "Leaving like this, after everything." Sarah felt something tighten in her chest. That familiar sensation of loss wrapped around duty, wrapped around something she could not quite name. "My father followed orders too," she said. "Even the ones he hated." "Yes, ma'am." Doc shifted his weight, and Sarah caught the slight wince he tried to hide. 33 years in the Navy, 15 of those as a SEAL, and his knees had the consistency of gravel. But he never complained, never asked for light duty, never did anything that might suggest he was anything less than mission ready. "That is what we do, follow orders, even when they taste like ashes." Behind them, Petty Officer First Class Thomas Williams approached, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust that caught the morning light. Prophet, they called him, because he had a habit of quoting scripture before missions and somehow always seemed to know when things were about to go sideways. He was 38, clean-shaven, with the kind of calm in his eyes that has suggested either deep faith or complete resignation. Probably both. "Morning prayer completed," he announced, falling into step with them. "Ask the Lord to bring us all home safe to our families. Asked him to forgive us for the things we have done and the things we failed to do." Prophet paused, squinting at the mountains. "Asked him to remember Afghanistan when we forget it." Chief Petty Officer Jake Morrison joined them next, moving with the loose-limbed grace of a natural athlete, despite being 45 and carrying the weight of 3 wars on his frame. Hawk had earned his call sign by having eyes that could spot a target at distances that made other snipers question their career choices. He had 3 kids back home, coached Little League baseball, and could put a bullet through a man's eye socket at 2,400 meters. The contradictions of modern warfare embodied in one person. "Loading is 90% complete," Hawk reported, his Louisiana accent softening the hard consonants. "We will be wheels up in 6 hours. His eyes tracked to Sarah's face, reading something there she had not intended to broadcast. "You okay, Commander?" Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice for a moment. Her satellite phone buzzed in her pocket, the specific vibration pattern that meant encrypted communication from someone with 4 stars or more. She pulled it out, saw the name on the screen, felt her pulse kick up despite herself. General James MacArthur, four-star General, JSOC commander, the man who had pulled her father's body from the wreckage in Fallujah and personally delivered the flag to a teenage girl who suddenly had no family left. The man who had mentored her through the academy, who had written the letter of recommendation that got her into SEAL training, who represented everything Sarah believed about duty and honor and the terrible, beautiful burden of service. She answered on the second ring. Yes, sir. The general's voice came through clear, despite the distance and encryption. Sarah, I need you to listen carefully. His tone carried something she had never heard from him before. Something that sounded almost like fear. Do not board that transport. I need your team to remain in theater. Wheels up authorization rescinded. Sarah felt the world tilt slightly, her tactical brain immediately calculating possibilities and coming up empty. Sir, we have orders to RTB. The entire withdrawal is in final phase. Her eyes tracked to Doc, who was watching her face with the intensity of someone reading a weather forecast that predicted hurricanes. Orders change, MacArthur said, and there was steel underneath the words now. The voice of a man who had commanded thousands in combat and never once flinched from the weight. I'm about to brief you on something that does not officially exist. You can say no. I want you to understand that from the start. You can board that C-17 and go home, and no one will think less of you. Sarah's hand tightened on the phone. With respect, sir, when someone says you can say no, it usually means the answer should be yes. A sound came through that might have been a laugh or might have been a sigh. That is what I liked about your father. He never let me get away with anything either. MacArthur paused, and Sarah heard voices in the background. The controlled chaos of an operations center in crisis mode. SEAL Team 7 is trapped in Helmand Province. 480 operators surrounded by approximately 2,000 hostiles. The Pentagon has designated them operational casualties. Stand-down order has been issued to all extraction assets. Sarah felt the world snap into sharp focus, every detail suddenly vivid with terrible clarity. The way Doc's jaw had gone tight, the way Hawk's hand had moved unconsciously towards his sidearm, the way Prophet had closed his eyes and started moving his lips in what could only be prayer. 480 men, the largest single SEAL force deployed since Vietnam, all written off with the kind of cold calculus that turned human beings into acceptable losses. How did they get trapped, sir? Sarah kept her voice level, professional, but something was building in her chest like a storm front. Intelligence failure. MacArthur's voice had gone flat, the tone of a man reporting his own failure. They hit a high-value target, Taliban Leadership Summit. What we did not know is that the summit was a trap. Wagner Group contractors coordinated the ambush. Our people walked into a kill box. Russians. Sarah felt the word like a physical weight. 20 years fighting insurgents, and at the end, it comes back to the Cold War again. Her father had grown up during the tail end of that conflict, had enlisted believing the Soviet threat was the defining evil of his generation. Now she was fighting their mercenary descendants in a war that had somehow become about everything and nothing simultaneously. What are their chances without extraction, sir? 72 hours at most. They have wounded, ammunition is at 40%, and Wagner Group has heavy weapons. MacArthur paused again, and Sarah could hear him breathing, could picture him in that command center with its wall of screens showing American lives as blue dots surrounded by an ocean of red. The Deputy Secretary of Defense has made his determination. No rescue. Quote, we cannot risk more American lives in a war that is already over, unquote. Sarah looked at her team. Petty Officer Second Class Luis Rodriguez had joined them now. Gunny, the youngest at 28, former Marine Scout sniper who had cross-rated to Navy because he wanted to be part of something bigger. His eyes were fixed on Sarah with the kind of intensity that came from understanding that history was happening in real time, and you got to choose what side you stood on. Behind him, Petty Officer First Class David Chen, Reaper, was already breaking down communications gear with the efficiency of a man who had decided the mission before the briefing was complete. Sir, Sarah said carefully, you are asking us to disobey direct orders from civilian leadership. I am asking you as Tom Garrett's daughter, not as an officer. MacArthur's voice had dropped to something almost intimate, the way you might speak in a church or at a funeral. Would your father follow that order? Memory crashed over Sarah like a wave. She was 18 again, standing in the dress blue uniform that still smelled like the store, watching them fold the flag with mechanical precision. MacArthur had knelt beside her, afterward, had taken her hands in his, had looked at her with eyes that held all the wars he had survived. Your daddy was the best Marine I ever served with. He never left a man behind. Ever. And then, quieter, almost to himself, I should have been faster. I should have reached him sooner. I am sorry. Sarah realized she had been silent too long. No, sir, she said. He would not follow that order. Then I am not ordering you to go. I am asking. You can say no. MacArthur was giving her the choice, and they both knew it was the cruelest kind of gift. If you go, it is deniable. Black operation, no official support, no extraction if you get compromised. If you succeed, I will take the credit. If you fail, I will take the blame. Either way, your SEAL career is probably over. Doc touched her elbow gently. We heard, he said quietly. His face was calm, but there was something burning behind his eyes, some decision already made that he was just waiting to announce. We are in. Sarah looked at each of them. Hawk nodded once, his sniper's stillness communicating more than words. Prophet had his eyes closed, but his lips had stopped moving. Prayer complete. Answer received. Gunny's jaw was set in that way young men have when they are about to do something dangerous and heroic and possibly stupid. Reaper was already reconfiguring their satellite uplink to accept encrypted burst transmissions from JSOC. How long do we have to decide, sir? Sarah asked, though she already knew her answer. Had known it the moment MacArthur mentioned 480 men trapped in the mountains where her father had died, in different mountains in a different war that somehow was the same war. I need confirmation in the next 30 seconds, or I am spinning up a different team. MacArthur's voice had regained its command edge. And Sarah, one more thing. I am sending you the casualty list now. You should see it before you commit. Her tablet buzzed. She opened the encrypted file, scrolled through names and ranks and service numbers, all the bureaucratic machinery of death and duty. Her eyes tracked down the list, past names she recognized, past units she had trained with, past faces she could picture with the clarity that combat etches into memory. And then she saw it. Captain James Riley, SEAL Team 7, 33 years old, Bronze Star with Valor, Purple Heart, the son of Gunnery Sergeant Michael Riley, who had served with Tom Garrett in Fallujah, who had been her father's best friend, who had named Tom as his son's godfather, who had held a teenage Sarah at the funeral and promised her that she had family, that she would never be alone. Jamie. She had not seen him in 6 years, not since his wedding where she had gotten drunk enough to forget for a few hours that orphans do not belong at celebrations of family. The tablet showed his status, wounded, abdominal trauma, stable for now, estimated survivability without surgical intervention 18 to 24 hours. Her hands shook. She forced them still through pure act of will. She scrolled further, her tactical brain cataloging wounded and unit assignments, and then she stopped completely, the tablet nearly slipping from her grip. Sergeant Dylan Garrett, SEAL Team 7, 25 years old, rifle platoon, uninjured, combat effective. Her brother, her baby brother, who she had raised after their father died, who had followed her into the Navy despite her telling him to choose a different path, who had made it through bow just on his second attempt and called her crying with joy when he got his trident. Dylan was there. Dylan was trapped with the 400 and everyone. Dylan was about to be designated an acceptable loss by people who had never met him and never would. Sarah's vision tunneled briefly. She heard Doc asking if she was all right from what seemed like a great distance. The world reduced itself to two names on a screen, two people she had sworn to protect, two reasons that made the choice both impossible and inevitable. General, she said, her voice steady despite everything, we are going, all of us. MacArthur let out a breath he must have been holding. C-17 will be ready for immediate departure. I will have updated intelligence and equipment waiting in Qatar. Wheels up in 30 minutes. Sarah, his voice softened slightly. Bring them home. All of them. Yes, sir. Sarah ended the call and looked at her team. They were watching her with expressions ranging from grim determination to something that might have been joy, if joy could be weaponized. Well, Doc asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. 480 SEALs trapped in Helmand. Sarah kept her voice level, falling into the professional tone that made impossible missions sound like routine operations. Pentagon says they are acceptable losses. General MacArthur disagrees. We are going to create an extraction corridor through systematic elimination of enemy leadership in heavy weapons positions. Hawk allowed himself a small smile, just like old times. Except this time we do not have official sanction, operational support, or extraction contingency if we get compromised. Sarah continued, this is black. If we fail, the general takes the fall. If we succeed, Pentagon takes the credit. Either way, our careers are probably over. Worth it, Gunny said immediately, with the certainty of someone too young to understand all the ways life can punish you for doing the right thing. Prophet opened his eyes. The Lord puts us where we need to be. 480 brothers need us. That is all the justification I require. Reaper was already pulling equipment manifests on his tablet. We will need additional ammunition, medical supplies, extended range optics, and probably a small miracle. He looked up, his Chinese-American features set in an expression of absolute resolve. My parents escaped communists in China. They taught me some fights are worth taking, even when you know you might lose. Russians want to take Americans prisoner? Not on my watch. Sarah felt something loosen in her chest, some tension she had been carrying since the moment MacArthur called. This was her team, these men who would follow her into hell because they trusted her to bring them back out. The weight of that trust was heavier than any weapon she had ever carried. But there was something else now, something she had not told them yet, something that made this mission different from every other impossible task they had undertaken. 30 minutes, she said, load for extended operations, high-value target elimination, no resupply assumed. We hit the ground in Helmand in 12 hours. Her eyes moved from face to face. Anyone who wants out, now is the time. No judgment. This is not a suicide mission, but the odds are not good. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence was its own form of assent. Doc nodded once, satisfied. Then we better get moving. Those 480 men do not know help is coming. Let us not keep them waiting. They moved with the practiced efficiency of professionals, breaking down their staging area, loading gear that had been packed for transport home, and repacking it for combat operations. Sarah secured her M2010 ESR rifle, the weapon she had carried through a dozen operations, the scope she had calibrated herself, the stock worn smooth by thousands of hours in the prone position. She checked the load on her sidearm, verified her communications equipment, and packed 3 days of ammunition because experience had taught her that battles never lasted as long as you hoped or as short as you feared. She pulled Doc aside as the others loaded equipment. I need to tell you something about the casualty list. Doc's expression shifted to something more concerned. Riley. Yes, and Dylan. My brother is in that unit. Doc closed his eyes briefly, understanding immediately why Sarah's hands had shaken. Jesus. Does Dylan know you are coming? No, and I am not going to tell him until we extract. I cannot have him doing something stupid because his sister is running Overwatch. Sarah met Doc's eyes. You cannot tell the others either. They need to focus on the mission, not worry about my family. They will figure it out when they see him. Then they can figure it out after we get all 480 home. Sarah's jaw tightened. This does not change anything. We save them all, or we save none of them. Dylan does not get special treatment because he is my brother. Understood, Doc paused. But Sarah, if it comes down to a choice, if you can only save some of them, Dylan is your brother. No one would blame you for choosing him. I would blame me. Sarah picked up her rifle, felt its familiar weight settle across her shoulders. My father died saving people who were not his children. I will not dishonor that by putting Dylan above anyone else in that unit. We save them all. That is the only choice I can live with. The C-17 was waiting where MacArthur had promised. Engines already running, Loadmaster waving them aboard with the kind of urgency that suggested the tower was asking questions nobody wanted to answer. They loaded quickly, gear stowed with the precision that came from doing this too many times to remember. The cargo hold smelled like hydraulic fluid and JP-8 and the particular metallic tang that military aircraft have after years of transporting instruments of death to places where death was the primary export. Sarah strapped into the webbing seat, felt the aircraft shudder as they taxied toward the runway. Through the small window, she could see Bagram falling away, the base that had been home and prison and sanctuary all at once. Somewhere out there, 480 men were fighting for their lives, believing they had been abandoned, not knowing that 6 people in a cargo plane were about to bet everything on the simple proposition that some promises are too important to break. Two of those men were Jamie Riley and Dylan Garrett. One was her father's godson, one was her baby brother. Both were reasons that made this mission personal in ways that violated every rule about professional detachment and tactical decision-making. Both were reasons she would probably fail to save everyone because you cannot be everywhere at once, and snipers only have so many bullets. Doc settled in beside her, his rifle cradled across his lap like a sleeping child. You know what you are doing, right? This is not just about saving strangers. This is about Jamie and Dylan. This is personal. Sarah met his eyes. Everything is personal. That is why we do it. The C-17 lifted off, engines screaming, climbing hard to get above the range of small arms fire. Sarah pulled out her phone one last time before they hit altitude where communications would require more sophisticated equipment. She opened the video chat application and called home, hoping her son would be awake despite the time difference. Tyler's face appeared on screen, 6 years old and still carrying that baby fat in his cheeks that would disappear in another year or two. He was wearing his Captain America pajamas, the ones she had sent him for his birthday last month. Behind him, she could see the small apartment in base housing at Fort Bragg, the walls decorated with his drawings of helicopters and soldiers and families that always included a mother who was usually absent. Mommy! His voice was pure joy, uncomplicated by the realities that would come later when he was old enough to understand what his mother did for a living. When are you coming home? Soon, baby, Sarah lied, the same lie she had told him 100 times before. Mommy has to do one more thing first, but I promise I will be home soon. You always say that. Tyler's lower lip protruded slightly, not quite a pout, but heading in that direction. But then you do not come home, and I have to stay with Mrs. Henderson, and she makes gross vegetables. Mrs. Henderson makes you eat vegetables because she loves you and wants you to grow up big and strong like your mommy. Sarah forced brightness into her voice, the performative cheerfulness that mothers use when their hearts are breaking. And I promise, when I get home, we will get pizza, extra cheese, and we will watch movies all day. Deal? Deal, Tyler said, mollified. Mommy? His voice went quieter, the way children do when they are about to say something important. Are you doing hero stuff? Sarah felt her throat close. Yes, baby. Mommy is doing hero stuff. Okay. Tyler nodded seriously as if this explained everything. Mommy, is Uncle Dylan doing hero stuff too? Sarah's breath caught. Tyler barely remembered Dylan, had only met his uncle twice since birth because deployments kept them apart. Yes, sweetheart. Uncle Dylan is being very brave right now. Will you tell him I said hi? I will tell him, Sarah promised. I will tell him you are proud of him. Behind Tyler, Mrs. Henderson appeared, an older woman with kind eyes and the patience of someone who had raised 5 children of her own. Time for breakfast, sweetheart, she said gently, then caught sight of Sarah on screen. Commander Garrett, safe travels. Thank you, Sarah managed. Take care of him. Always do. Mrs. Henderson's expression said she understood more than Sarah had told her. That base housing gossip traveled fast and everyone knew when SEALs deployed on no notice. You take care of yourself. That boy needs his mother. And, she added quietly, his uncle. The connection ended. Sarah sat in the cargo hold of the C-17, surrounded by men who had volunteered to defy orders and risk everything, carrying a rifle that had killed more people than she could count, heading toward mountains where 480 men were about to die unless she could perform a miracle. 2 of those men carried her name. 2 of those men were reasons she might fail everyone else because impossible choices had a way of becoming inevitable once bullets started flying. She pulled out the photo again. Her father grinning at the camera, young and lame and invincible in the way you are before the world teaches you about mortality. He had gone to Fallujah because 160 Marines were counting on him. He had died bringing them home. General MacArthur had saved most of them, but not Tom Garrett. Not the man whose daughter now sat in this aircraft making the same choice her father had made, following the same code, accepting the same risks. Not the man whose son was trapped in mountains waiting for a rescue that Pentagon had decided was too expensive in blood and politics. If I fail this time, Sarah whispered to the photo, to the memory, to the ghost that Tyler believed was watching over them. I am so sorry. Dylan trusted me to keep him safe when he joined the Navy. Jamie trusted Dad to watch over him. I am sorry if I cannot keep those promises. Doc's hand closed over her shoulder, warm and solid and real. You will not fail, he said quietly. You know how I know? How? Because your father did not raise a failure. Because General MacArthur did not mentor a failure. Because we are not going to let you fail. His grip tightened slightly. 480 men are alive right now because we are on this plane. They just do not know it yet. Let us go make sure they find out. Sarah tucked the photo away, checked her weapons one more time, and let herself believe it was possible. Somewhere ahead in the darkness, in mountains that had defeated armies for 3,000 years, 480 men were fighting and dying and hoping for a miracle they had no right to expect. Two of those men were hers in ways that went beyond professional obligation. She was going to save all of them or die trying. There was no third option. There never had been. The C-17 climbed higher, pushing through clouds, leaving behind the war that was officially over and heading toward the battle that officially did not exist. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to sleep, knowing she would need every ounce of strength for what was coming. Behind her eyelids, she saw Tyler's face and Dylan's name on the casualty list, and Jamie Riley, who her father had died trying to save his father, and her father's grave at Arlington National Cemetery, where the grass grew green on the bodies of heroes who had made the same choice she was making now. Some promises are bigger than one person. They are the foundation of who we are. Guardians, protectors, the ones who run toward danger when everyone else runs away. Her father had understood that. General MacArthur understood that. And now Sarah understood it too. Understood it in her bones, in her blood, in the muscle memory of 1,000 training repetitions that had prepared her for exactly this moment. Dylan was alive right now. Jamie was alive right now. 478 others were alive right now. Sarah would keep them that way or die with them. There was no acceptable loss. There never had been. That was the oath. That was the promise. That was the burden and the gift of being the kind of person who could not walk away when walking away was the reasonable thing to do. 480 men, including her brother, including her father's godson. She would bring them home or die trying. The C-17 flew on through the night, carrying 6 soldiers toward impossible odds. And Sarah let herself believe in miracles one more time. Because if you stop believing in miracles, you stop being the kind of person who could make them happen. And 480 men were counting on her to make one happen in the next 72 hours. She would not let them down. She could not let them down. Her father's ghost would not let her. Dylan's future would not let her. Jamie's trust would not let her. Tyler's innocence would not let her. The weight of the rifle across her lap would not let her. The men sleeping in the cargo hold would not let her. She was Sarah Garrett, daughter of heroes, sister of heroes, student of generals, SEAL operator, mother orphan, guardian. And she was going to keep her promises no matter what it cost, because that is what guardians do. They stand watch in the darkness. They hold the line. They come when called. They never surrender. They never retreat. They never leave anyone behind. Never. The mountains of Afghanistan waited ahead, ancient and unforgiving, ready to add more names to the long list of those who had tried and failed. But Sarah was not planning on failing. She was planning on rewriting the rules. She was planning on making the Pentagon remember what it felt like to be told no. She was planning on teaching the world that some things matter more than risk assessments and political calculations and acceptable losses. 480 lives mattered more. Dylan's life mattered more. Jamie Riley's life mattered more. The promise she had made to her father's memory mattered more. Everything else was just noise. The aircraft flew on. The mission had begun. The mountains rose from the desert floor like broken teeth, jagged and ancient, their peaks still carrying snow that would not melt until summer came again, if summer came at all in this forsaken corner of the world. Sarah watched them through the scratched window of the C-17 as they descended toward the forward operating base in Jordan, the last official American footprint before they crossed into territory that would not acknowledge their presence or mourn their deaths. The sun was setting behind those mountains, turning the sky the color of old blood, and she wondered if omens were real or just the mind's way of preparing for what the body already knew was coming. They landed hard. Hard, the kind of landing that came from pilots who had done too many combat approaches and forgotten what smooth felt like. The cargo ramp dropped before the engines finished spooling down, revealing a landscape of tan and brown and more tan. Everything the color of dust, because dust was all that remained after empires crumbled into memory. Sarah was first off, boots hitting tarmac that still radiated heat from a day spent baking under a sun that had witnessed every variation of human stupidity for 5,000 years. A figure waited at the edge of the landing zone, silhouetted against portable floodlights that created more shadows than illumination. As Sarah approached, the figure resolved into a man in his early 60s, wearing the simple uniform of a four-star general, with none of the affectation that usually accompanied that much authority. General James MacArthur looked older than she remembered, the lines in his face deeper, the gray in his hair more complete. But his eyes held the same sharp intelligence that had made him one of the most respected commanders in a military that did not give respect easily or often. Sarah came to attention automatically, muscle memory overriding the informal relationship they had maintained for years. "Sir," MacArthur waved away the formality with a gesture that somehow managed to be both weary and commanding. "We are past that now. If this goes wrong, I will be joining you in whatever court-martial they dream up." His eyes moved past her to the team unloading gear with practiced efficiency. "Your men look ready." "They are not my men, sir. They are volunteers who know exactly what they are signing up for." Sarah paused, measuring her next words carefully. "They are also the best shooters I have ever worked with. If anyone can do this, they can." The general nodded slowly, his gaze tracking back to her face with an intensity that suggested he was reading more than she intended to show. "Your father used to say something similar about his Marines, right before Fallujah. He believed in them completely. They believed in him. It made what came after harder, somehow." Sarah felt the familiar ache, the one that lived just beneath her ribs and never quite healed. "He died doing what he thought was right. That has to count for something." "It counts for everything," MacArthur said quietly. "That is why we are here. That is why you are about to do something that will either save 480 lives or end your career and possibly your freedom. Because some things count for more than consequences." He turned and started walking toward a low building that crouched at the edge of the airfield, like something trying to avoid notice. Sarah followed, her team falling in behind her without needing orders, moving through the darkness with the kind of coordination that came from training together until you stopped thinking of yourself as individuals and started thinking of yourself as parts of a single organism with one purpose. The briefing room was what briefing rooms always were: a windowless space with bad lighting and worse ventilation, maps covering every available wall surface, computers glowing with the sickly light of classified information being displayed to people with clearances that gave them access to truths most citizens would never know and probably did not want to. A woman stood at the center of the room, 50-ish, gray suit, the kind of severe intelligence in her eyes that suggested she had forgotten more secrets than most people would learn in a lifetime. "This is Catherine Brennan," MacArthur said, "CIA Station Chief, formerly Marine Intelligence. She has information you need." Kate offered no handshake, just a nod of acknowledgement that suggested she had read their files and found them acceptable if not impressive. "Your target is here." She activated a screen showing satellite imagery of a valley floor dotted with structures that might have been compounds or might have been ruins. It was hard to tell in infrared. 480 SEALs from Team 7, currently surrounded by approximately 2,000 hostiles. Composition is mixed Taliban and Wagner Group contractors. Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Russians. We were told this was Taliban only." "Intelligence changes," Kate said without inflection. "Wagner Group moved in after the initial ambush. They have heavy weapons, professional tactics, and communication equipment that suggests this was not an opportunistic attack. This was planned." "How far in advance?" Doc asked from behind Sarah, his voice carrying the kind of skepticism that came from decades of being lied to by intelligence analysts who considered ground troops expendable sources of verification for theories developed in air-conditioned offices. "At least 2 weeks," Kate replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Which means someone told them Team 7 would be there. Which means we have a leak somewhere in the command structure." The room went silent, the implications settling over everyone like fallout. A leak meant someone with access to operational planning, someone with security clearances, someone who had betrayed 480 Americans for money or ideology or whatever rationalization let them sleep at night. Sarah felt rage building behind her eyes, The kind that came from understanding that her father had died, trusting a system that apparently included people willing to sell his daughter's brothers in arms to the highest bidder. Do we know who? Her voice came out harder than she intended. Working on it, Kate said. NSA is backtracking its communications, but Wagner Group uses sophisticated encryption. What we do know is this. She pulled up a new image, a man in his late 40s, Slavic features, cold eyes that looked at the camera with the kind of confidence that came from killing people and never being caught. Colonel Alexei Volkov, Wagner Group's senior commander. Former Spetsnaz, served in Chechnya, Georgia, Syria. He is personally directing the siege. If you want to break their command structure, he is your primary target. Sarah studied the face, memorizing the features the way she had memorized 100 other faces that ended up in her scope. What is his tactical approach? The goal? Patient, Kate said. He is not trying to overrun your SEALs. He is trying to capture them. Wagner gets paid more for prisoners than bodies. He will grind them down, wait for ammunition to run out, then move in with overwhelming force. Timeline, Sarah asked. 72 hours from initial contact. We are now at 18 hours. You have approximately 54 hours before he makes his move. MacArthur stepped forward, his presence filling the room despite making no obvious gesture. Your mission is to eliminate Wagner Group leadership, create chaos in their command structure, and provide covering fire for extraction. I have 4 MH-60 Blackhawks on standby, pilots who owe me favors and do not ask questions. The moment you create an opening, they will move in for rescue. And if we cannot create an opening, Hawk asked quietly, then you extract and we try something else, MacArthur said. But his tone suggested he did not believe there would be a something else, that this was the last chance and everyone in the room knew it. Sarah looked at the map, calculating distances and sight lines and 1,000 other variables that would determine whether 480 men lived or died. We will need insertion within 10 kilometers of the target, high altitude jump, low opening, minimal signature. Already arranged, MacArthur said. You will jump in 6 hours, pre-dawn insertion. By the time Wagner Group knows you are there, you will have killed enough of them that they will be too busy dying to care. Sarah turned to her team. They were watching her with expressions that ranged from grim determination to something that might have been anticipation if you could weaponize anticipation. Equipment check in 3 hours. Sleep if you can. We hit the ground running, and we do not stop until every one of those 480 men is on a helicopter heading home. The team filed out, leaving Sarah alone with MacArthur and Kate. The general looked at her for a long moment, his face unreadable. There is something else you should know, he said finally. About the casualties. Sarah felt her pulse kick up. Jamie Riley, his status. Critical but stable. Abdominal wound, probably shrapnel. Their medic has him stabilized, but he needs surgery within 48 hours. MacArthur paused. He does not know you are coming. None of them do. They think they have been abandoned. Good, Sarah said. Let them think that. Desperation makes people fight harder. MacArthur nodded slowly, and for just a moment, he looked every one of his 63 years. Looked like a man who had sent too many people to die and carried every name like a stone in his pocket. Your father would be proud of you. I hope you know that. Sarah felt her throat close. He would probably think I am an idiot for volunteering for a suicide mission. He would think you are exactly the kind of person he raised you to be. MacArthur's hand closed on her shoulder, warm and solid and real. Bring them home, Sarah. All of them. That is all I ask. Yes, sir. Sarah straightened, pushing emotion down into the place where she kept everything that would interfere with the mission. We will bring them home or die trying. There is no third option. She left the briefing room, stepped out into the desert night, where stars blazed with the kind of clarity you only got in places far from civilization's light pollution. The team had gathered near their gear, running final checks with the kind of obsessive attention to detail that kept people alive when everything else conspired to kill them. Sarah watched them work, these men who had volunteered to defy orders and risk everything, and felt the weight of command settle across her shoulders like a familiar coat. Doc approached, moving with that economical grace that suggested nothing wasted, everything purposeful. The men are ready, equipment is checked. We are just waiting on your word. Sarah looked up at the stars, wondering if her father was up there somewhere, watching, judging, forgiving. We go in 6 hours. I want everyone sharp. That means sleep if possible, food if you can stomach it, and whatever personal rituals get you ready to kill people at long distance. Doc smiled slightly. You know what my ritual is? I think about my daughter. She is a nurse, deployed with the army in Germany. Every time I look through a scope at someone who needs killing, I think about all the daughters who get to keep their fathers because I am good at my job. Makes it easier somehow. Sarah nodded, understanding more than he was saying. We all have our reasons. The trick is making sure the reasons are strong enough to carry us through what comes next. The hours passed in the strange, accelerated way they did before combat, time moving too fast and too slow simultaneously. Every minute simultaneously eternal and instantaneous. Sarah tried to sleep and could not, tried to eat and managed 3 bites of an MRE that tasted like cardboard, and regret, tried to think about anything except 480 men dying in mountains that did not care about American promises or American blood. Finally, the moment came. They geared up in silence, each man moving through pre-jump checks with the ritualistic precision of people who knew that forgotten equipment meant death by falling or death by enemy fire, and neither option was acceptable. Sarah strapped on her parachute, secured her rifle, verified her oxygen system, and became the person she needed to be, pushing Sarah the mother and Sarah the daughter into a locked room in her mind where they would wait until the mission was complete. The C-130 that would carry them into Afghan airspace was older than most of the crew, a transport plane that had been ferrying soldiers to war zones since before Sarah was born. She climbed aboard with her team, found a position along the fuselage, and tried not to think about how many men had sat in these same seats and never came home. The engines coughed to life, the whole aircraft shuddering like something reluctant to wake, and then they were taxiing, accelerating, lifting into darkness that swallowed them completely. The flight took 3 hours, 3 hours of sitting in near darkness, with the engine noise making conversation impossible and the cold seeping through every layer until Sarah could not remember what warm felt like. She watched her team, faces hidden behind oxygen masks, eyes visible only as glints reflecting the red interior lights. They looked like demons or angels depending on how you define such things. Warriors heading toward violence with the calm acceptance of people who had made peace with mortality somewhere along the way. The loadmaster appeared, holding up fingers. 10 minutes. Sarah's heart rate kicked up despite years of training, despite dozens of jumps, despite knowing that fear was useless and dangerous and absolutely unavoidable. She stood, checked her gear one final time, moved toward the ramp that would open onto 30,000 feet of nothing. The ramp dropped. Wind screamed into the cargo hold, carrying away warmth and sound and anything not secured. Sarah looked out at darkness absolute, no lights below, no reference points, just the abstract knowledge that somewhere down there was earth and mountains and 480 men who needed her to be perfect. She jumped. The free fall was silent in the way that high-altitude jumps were silent. Wind too fast to hear a sound, just pressure against the body, the sense of falling without any visual confirmation because there was nothing to see, just darkness and stars, and the altimeter counting down the distance between Sarah and whatever waited below. She tracked her team through small lights attached to their gear. 6 points of reference in the void, falling together toward the same fate. At 800 feet, she pulled her chute, felt the opening shock like a giant hand grabbing her from behind, the sudden deceleration from terminal velocity to controlled descent. Her canopy deployed clean, no twists, no malfunctions, and she steered toward the landing zone using night vision that turned the world into shades of green, where darkness became visible and the terrain resolved into something approaching clarity. Landing was hard, always was when you carried this much gear, but she rolled with the impact and came up with rifle ready, scanning for threats while her chute collapsed behind her. The team landed within 30 seconds of each other, each man going through the same process of landing, securing gear, establishing perimeter, becoming operational in the space of heartbeats. Reaper was already setting up communications equipment, unfolding a satellite dish that looked too fragile to survive the jump, but apparently had. He worked with the kind of focused intensity that suggested he was having a conversation with technology that only he could hear, fingers flying over a keyboard that glowed softly in the darkness. "We are dark to official channels," he reported quietly, his voice carrying just far enough for the team to hear. "Link established to General MacArthur only. Encryption holding. We are ghosts." Sarah checked her GPS, verified their position against the map she had memorized. 10 kilometers to target. We move in bounds, 200-meter intervals, full tactical awareness. Wagner Group has patrols out. We do not engage unless necessary. Our mission is to get into position, not to fight a ground war. They move through the mountains like smoke, 6 figures in full combat gear somehow making no sound, leaving no trace, flowing around obstacles the way water flows around stones. Sarah led, her night vision painting the world in artificial clarity, every rock and depression and potential ambush site visible as terrain, to be evaluated and either crossed or avoided. Behind her, the team moved in perfect coordination, each man covering sectors, watching approaches, maintaining the kind of situational awareness that kept people alive in an environment where death came without warning. 4 hours of movement brought them to the ridgeline Sarah had selected from satellite imagery, a position that offered sight lines to the valley floor, where 480 SEALs were dug in behind improvised fortifications that would not stop determined assault, but might slow it enough for people to die with weapons in their hands. She could see them through her scope, tiny figures in defensive positions, and even from 2 kilometers away she could read the body language of defeat, the slumped shoulders and mechanical movements of people who had accepted they were going to die and were just trying to delay it as long as possible. Establish hide sites, Sarah ordered quietly. Hawk and I take primary position. Doc and Gunny secondary, 300 meters north. Prophet and Reaper, security and communications, 200 meters behind primary. The team dispersed, each pair moving to their assigned position and beginning the process of creating hides that would be invisible from 20 meters away, using natural terrain and camouflage and the small magic of professional fieldcraft to disappear into landscape that offered almost no concealment. Sarah and Hawk worked in silence, scraping out a shallow depression, covering it with local vegetation, creating firing ports that would allow them to shoot while remaining hidden from anyone who was not standing directly over their position. By the time they finished, dawn was threatening the eastern horizon, that first pale wash of light that came before the sun and made Sarah's eyes water after hours of operating under night vision. She removed the goggles, let her eyes adjust, and glassed the battlefield with her spotting scope. The valley floor was a killing ground. Flat terrain with almost no cover, dominated by Wagner Group positions on 3 sides and Taliban fighters holding the 4th approach. The SEALs were completely encircled, their defensive perimeter maybe 400 meters across, not nearly large enough for that many men, everyone packed together in a target that would be devastating if Wagner decided to drop mortars or call in artillery. Sarah counted enemy positions, marking each one on her mental map. Machine gun nests, mortar teams, command posts, radio operators, officers directing troops. She was building a target list, prioritizing by threat level and position, calculating ranges and wind drift and 1,000 other variables that would determine whether her bullets arrived on target or kicked up dust harmlessly beside people who badly needed killing. Hawk settled in beside her, his rifle locked into position, eye to scope, breathing slow and controlled. Range to nearest target? Sarah checked. 1,540 meters to that machine gun nest. Wind 3 knots, left to right. Temperature rising but stable. Conditions are good. Copy, Hawk murmured, waiting on your call. Sarah keyed her radio, connecting to the rest of her team. Stand by for first shot. We go loud in 30 seconds. After first shot, Wagner will know someone is here. We make every bullet count. She settled behind her rifle, feeling it press against her shoulder like an old friend, the weight and balance familiar after thousands of rounds fired in practice and combat. Through her scope, the enemy machine gun team was visible. 3 men clustered around a Russian-made PKM, laughing about something, completely unaware that death was watching them from nearly a mile away. Sarah calculated the shot, adjusted for wind and temperature and elevation and the rotation of the earth because at this distance, even Coriolis effect mattered. She controlled her breathing, felt her heart rate slow, found that place between heartbeats where the rifle became an extension of her will, and the bullet was already traveling downrange before she squeezed the trigger. The shot broke clean, the rifle recoiling against her shoulder, the suppressor reducing the sound to something like a cough instead of the thunderous crack an unsuppressed rifle would make. Sarah was already working the bolt, chambering another round, but she kept her scope on target, watching. 2.3 seconds after she fired, the PKM gunner's head snapped back, a small red flower blooming where his face had been, and he dropped like a puppet with cut strings. The other two members of the team stared at him for a heartbeat, not understanding, and then Hawk's rifle coughed beside her, and the loader collapsed. And then Sarah fired again, and the assistant gunner went down, and the machine gun nest was silent. It took the enemy another 10 seconds to understand they were under sniper fire. Sarah used that 10 seconds to eliminate a radio operator and an officer who had been directing mortar teams. Hawk took down two more machine gunners, and then the valley erupted into chaos. Wagner group fighters diving for cover, shouting orders in Russian and Pashto, trying to identify where the shots were coming from, while Sarah and Hawk continued to work methodically through their target list. From the SEAL defensive position, someone started cheering. Sarah heard it faintly across the distance, the sound of men who had given up hope, suddenly realizing they might not die today after all. She pushed the emotion aside, focused on the scope, found another target, eliminated it. This was mathematics now, ballistics and biology, the physics of making people stop existing at ranges that turned killing into something almost abstract. Doc's voice came through her earpiece. Secondary position engaging. We have targets. Copy, Sarah replied, tracking to her next priority. Sniper teams work independently. Anything carrying a weapon is fair game. We thin the herd until they break. The battle became a rhythm. Sight picture, acquire target, calculate range, adjust for wind squeeze, trigger confirm, hit chamber, next round repeat. Sarah stopped thinking in words, operating purely on trained reflex and muscle memory. Her body executing actions, her conscious mind had stopped directing somewhere around the 15th kill. The rifle became hot under her hands, the barrel heating from repeated fire, but she continued, economical and precise, wasting nothing. 2 hours into the engagement, Wagner Group tried to flank their position. Sarah spotted the team moving up the ridgeline, 12 men in tactical formation, moving well but not well enough, and she keyed her radio. Reaper, we have company. 12 hostiles. You're 3 o'clock. 300 meters and closing. Copy, Reaper replied, his voice utterly calm. Prophet and I have them. The flanking team never knew what hit them. Reaper and Prophet engaged from concealment, their rifles creating a crossfire that turned the narrow mountain path into an abattoir. The enemy tried to return fire, but they were shooting at muzzle flashes and failing to account for the fact that suppressors distorted perceived location. Within 90 seconds, all 12 were down, and Reaper's voice came back on the radio. Threat neutralized. Position secure. Sarah allowed herself a moment of grim satisfaction. Wagner Group was learning the hard way that trying to kill 6 professional snipers on terrain they had chosen was the kind of mistake you only made once because there usually was not an opportunity for twice. She returned to her primary mission, identifying and eliminating anyone who looked like they had authority or training or equipment worth protecting. By noon, the battlefield had transformed. Enemy forces that had been coordinated and professional at dawn were now scattered and leaderless, individual groups taking cover and waiting for orders that would never come because everyone who could give orders was dead. Sarah had lost count of her kills somewhere around 30. Hawk had stopped reporting because it did not matter anymore, and the valley floor was littered with bodies that would not move again. The SEALs had noticed. They were no longer just defending. They were aggressively patrolling their perimeter, taking back ground they had conceded, moving wounded to more protected positions. Sarah could see it through her scope, the subtle shift from desperation to hope, the way people moved when they believed rescue was possible. Her radio crackled. Unknown station, this is Guardian 6. Her heart stopped. That was Jamie Riley's call sign. His voice sounded weak but alive, and she had to force herself not to reply immediately. Unknown station, if you can hear me, thank you. I do not know who you are, but you are saving our lives. Please identify so we can coordinate. Sarah wanted to answer, wanted to tell him it was her, wanted to hear him say her name the way he used to when they were kids, and he was her father's best friend's son, and she was the orphan girl everyone pitied. But operational security overrode emotion. She keyed her radio to the team frequency instead. Continue mission. No acknowledgement to friendly forces. We stay ghosts. The afternoon brought new challenges. Wagner Group adapted, stopped clustering their forces, started using civilians as cover, made themselves harder targets. Sarah adjusted and became more patient, waiting for clean shots instead of taking risks. The mathematics changed, but the outcome remained constant. Anyone who threatened the 480 SEALs died. It was that simple. Was that evening approached, the sun dropping toward the mountains, and Sarah realized they had been in position for 14 hours without food or rest, operating on adrenaline and training, and something that might have been faith if faith could be weaponized. Her body ached, her eyes burned, her hands were raw from working the rifle bolt, but she continued because stopping meant people died and she had made a promise. Reaper's voice cut through her focus. Commander, I am picking up encrypted transmissions. Russian language. Someone is requesting air support. Sarah felt ice in her stomach. Confirmation? 90% certain. They are calling for helicopters, heavily armed. ETA unknown, but probably within 2 hours based on transmission patterns. Sarah keyed her radio to MacArthur's frequency. General, we have a problem. Wagner is calling in air assets. If they get gunships in here, we cannot protect the perimeter. MacArthur's voice came back tight with tension. How many have you eliminated so far? Sarah did quick math. Approximately 40 confirmed kills across all positions. Enemy is disorganized but still has numbers. We estimate 1,200 hostiles remaining. Hold position, MacArthur ordered. I am moving up the extraction timeline. Helicopters will be inbound in 90 minutes. Can you keep Wagner suppressed that long? Sarah looked at the valley floor, at the enemy forces regrouping, at the 480 men who were depending on 6 people they could not see and did not know. Yes, sir, we can hold. Then hold, because if Wagner gets those gunships in the air before our birds arrive, this becomes a massacre. MacArthur paused. Sarah, your father held Fallujah for 8 hours against impossible odds. I know you can do this. The transmission ended. Sarah looked at Hawk, who had been listening on the same frequency. His face was grim but determined. 90 minutes, he said. We have done harder. Have we? Sarah asked, genuinely curious. No, Hawk admitted. But we are going to anyway. Sarah keyed the team frequency. Listen up. Extraction timeline moved up. Helicopters inbound in 90 minutes. Wagner is calling in air support. We need to maintain fire superiority until our birds arrive. That means targets of opportunity, maximum rate of fire, conservation be damned. We empty our magazines if we have to. Questions? Silence on the radio, which was answer enough. Then let us give these Russian bastards a lesson in American marksmanship. Sarah settled back behind her rifle, found a target, and squeezed the trigger. The war was not over. It was just getting started. The next 90 minutes would determine whether 480 men lived or died, whether 6 snipers could hold off an army, whether promises made to the dead could be kept by the living. Sarah did not know if they would succeed. She only knew they would try, because that was what you did when you were the last line between hope and despair. You held, you fought, you refused to surrender, and you brought your people home or died in the attempt. There was no third option. There had never been a third option. The sun continued its descent toward the mountains. The enemy continued to mass for another assault, and 6 American snipers continued to do what they did best, which was to make very bad people stop existing at ranges that defied belief. The battle raged on. The sun climbed over the Afghan mountains like a judgment, revealing a valley floor littered with bodies that would not rise again. Sarah had stopped counting her kills somewhere around 40, the number losing meaning when measured against the 480 lives she was trying to save. Her rifle barrel was hot enough to distort the air above it, the weapon protesting hours of continuous use but still functioning because military equipment was designed to endure exactly this kind of abuse. 18 hours. They had been on this ridgeline for 18 hours, systematically dismantling Wagner Group's command structure 1 bullet at a time. The enemy had started the engagement with professional confidence and tactical cohesion. Now they were scattered groups taking cover and waiting for orders from officers who would never give those orders because Sarah and her team had made sure those officers stopped existing. Commander, Reaper's voice cut through the tactical frequency, urgent in a way that made Sarah's pulse kick up. I am intercepting encrypted communications. Someone from JSOC is transmitting SEAL positions to Wagner Group. Real-time updates. Grid coordinates accurate to within 10 meters. Sarah felt ice in her stomach. Say again, you are telling me someone at Fort Bragg is giving the enemy our people's locations? Affirmative. Reaper's voice carried the kind of professional calm that came from being the bearer of terrible news. Transmission just went out 3 minutes ago. Wagner adjusted their mortar positions exactly where the communications said to target. This is not a coincidence. This is coordination. Do you have voice print? Transmission origin? Working on it. Give me 5 minutes. Reaper paused. Commander, whoever this is has access to live satellite feeds and operational planning. This is not some junior analyst. This is senior command level. Sarah keyed her mic to MacArthur's frequency. General, we have a major problem. Someone in your command structure is actively feeding Wagner Group targeting data. The pause before MacArthur responded was longer than Sarah liked. I know, he said finally. CIA flagged unusual communications patterns 3 hours ago. We have been trying to identify the source. You are saying it is still ongoing? Affirmative. Last transmission 3 minutes ago. Sir, whoever this is just directed mortar fire at the SEAL medical station. They are trying to maximize casualties. MacArthur's voice went hard. Catherine Brennan is working the problem from her end. We will identify and neutralize. Until then, assume all operational communications are compromised. Switch to alternate encryption protocol Delta 7. Copy that. Sarah ended the transmission and looked at Hawk, who had been listening on the same frequency. His face was grim. A traitor, Hawk said quietly. Someone willing to sell out 500 Americans for Russian money. His Louisiana accent had thickened with anger. I have seen a lot of evil in my career, but this is something different. Movement in the valley caught Sarah's attention. A convoy approaching from the north. 3 vehicles flying flags she recognized immediately. Russian, not Wagner Group contractors, but actual Russian military vehicles. And in the lead vehicle, visible through her scope, was the man from the intelligence photos. Colonel Alexei Volkov, former Spetsnaz, current Wagner Group commander, and apparently important enough that Moscow was sending support. Doc, you seeing this? Sarah adjusted her scope, tracking the convoy. I see it. Doc's voice was tight. That is not just Wagner Group anymore. That is Russian military providing direct support. This operation just became an international incident. It was always an international incident, Prophet observed from his position. We just did not know it yet. The Lord reveals truth in his own time. The convoy stopped at what appeared to be Wagner Group's new command post, established after Sarah had eliminated everyone at the old one. Volkov emerged from the lead vehicle, immediately surrounded by security, and Sarah realized with a cold certainty that she was looking at the man orchestrating everything. The ambush, the siege, probably the mole in JSOC feeding him information. Range 2,100 meters, Hawk reported. Wind variable, 4 to 6 knots. Possible shot, but difficult. Hold fire, Sarah ordered. I want to see what he does, who he talks to. We might learn something about our traitor. Through her scope, she watched Volkov move through the command post with the confidence of someone who knew he was winning. He stopped at a communications station, spoke briefly with an operator, then pulled out what appeared to be a satellite phone. Not military issue. Something commercial, encrypted, untraceable through normal channels. Reaper, Sarah keyed her mic. Volkov just made a call on a sat phone. Can you intercept? Negative on intercept, but I can track the general direction. Give me a minute. The sound of rapid typing came through the radio. Okay. Calls going to United States, East Coast. Triangulation suggests Virginia or North Carolina. Fort Bragg is in North Carolina, Sarah said quietly. Yes, ma'am. Reaper paused. Commander, whoever Volkov is talking to is not using military communications. This is personal phone to personal phone. Off the books. Can you identify the number? Working on it, but these encryption protocols are sophisticated, CIA level, maybe NSA. This is not amateur hour. Sarah watched Volkov finish his conversation and return the phone to his pocket. He moved to a map table, began pointing at positions, clearly planning something. The Wagner Group officers around him nodded, taking notes, and Sarah understood she was watching the planning session for the final assault that would overwhelm the trapped SEALs. We need to disrupt this, she said. Hawk, can you take Volkov from here? Possible, but not probable. Hawk adjusted his position slightly. Wind is swirling. Range is extreme. Heat shimmer from the valley floor is distorting my sight picture. I would give it 30% chance of success. Those are terrible odds for a shot that might be our only chance at him, Doc observed. Agreed. Sarah made a decision. We reposition, move closer, get a clean shot. Take Volkov out of the equation and Wagner Group loses coordination. Commander, Gunny's voice came through. We have movement on the valley floor. SEAL position is sending out a patrol. Looks like maybe 12 men. Sarah swung her scope toward the SEAL defensive perimeter, and her heart stopped. Leading the patrol, moving with the confident tactical spacing of someone who had done this 1,000 times, was a figure she would have recognized at 10 times the distance. Sergeant Dylan Garrett, her baby brother, 25 years old and completely unaware that his sister was watching him through a rifle scope from 2 kilometers away. Hawk had seen it too. Is that Dylan? Yes, Sarah forced herself to say. That is my brother. The team frequency went silent for a moment, everyone processing this information. Finally, Doc spoke. Does he know you are here? No, and he is not going to know until this is over. Sarah kept her voice level, professional, but her hands wanted to shake. He is just another SEAL down there. We treat him the same as everyone else. Sarah, Prophet said gently, he is your brother. It is okay to be worried. I am worried about all 480 of them, Sarah replied, perhaps too sharply. Dylan does not get special treatment. He does not get protected more than anyone else. He is a professional operator doing his job. We do our job. That is all there is. But even as she said it, Sarah's scope tracked Dylan's movement across the valley floor with an intensity that had nothing to do with professional concern. He moved well, she noticed, with a mixture of pride and terror. He had learned from his training. He was doing everything right. And he was about to walk into a Wagner Group ambush because Sarah could see enemy fighters positioning themselves along his patrol route, and there was no way to warn him without compromising her position. Dylan's patrol has hostiles ahead, she transmitted. 8 fighters concealed positions along the dried riverbed at grid November Kilo 4732. They are setting up an ambush. Can we engage? Hawk asked. Negative. If we fire now, we reveal our position and Wagner sends everything at us. Sarah watched Dylan's patrol continue forward, oblivious. Her finger moved to the trigger of her rifle, torn between the mission and the brother. We need them to make contact first. Then we support. That is your brother down there, Doc said quietly, walking into an ambush. I know, Sarah replied, her voice barely above a whisper. I know. The next 30 seconds lasted an eternity. Dylan's patrol moved forward with proper tactical spacing, checking corners, covering sectors, doing everything the manuals taught them to do. And it was not enough because the Wagner Group fighters were professionals too, and they knew how to use terrain, and they had the advantage of prepared positions. The ambush was sprung with brutal efficiency. Wagner fighters rose from concealment and opened fire at a range of less than 20 meters. Dylan's patrol returned fire immediately, muscle memory overriding surprise. But 2 SEALs went down in the first seconds, and the others were pinned behind inadequate cover. Engage, Sarah ordered, and 6 rifles spoke as one. The Wagner fighters never knew what killed them. Sarah's bullet took the lead ambusher through the base of his skull. Hawk eliminated 2 more in rapid succession. Doc, Prophet, Gunny, and Reaper each found targets. In less than 5 seconds, 8 enemy fighters became 8 bodies, and Dylan's patrol was shooting at ghosts. Through her scope, Sarah watched Dylan rally his men, check the wounded, establish security. He was good. He was doing everything right. And he had no idea his sister had just saved his life from a position he could not see. Guardian 6, this is Reaper Actual. Dylan's voice came across the General SEAL frequency. We just got hit by an ambush. 8 enemy KIA, but we did not fire the killing shots. Someone else is out here, someone friendly. Sarah wanted to respond, wanted to tell him she was there, wanted to hear him say her name. But operational security overrode everything else. She keyed her team frequency instead. Continue mission, no acknowledgement to friendly forces. Her radio crackled again, different voice this time. Guardian 6, this is Mercy 1. We have 2 wounded from the ambush patrol. 1 is critical. Request immediate medevac. Sarah's blood turned cold. Mercy 1 was the call sign for the SEAL medical team. 1 critical meant someone was dying. She forced herself to ask, Mercy 1, identify critical casualty. The medic's voice came back tight with stress. Sergeant Dylan Garrett, gunshot wound to the chest, tension pneumothorax. I have stabilized, but he needs surgical intervention within 2 hours or he will not make it. The world stopped. Sarah felt herself falling through space and time and possibility. Dylan was dying. Her baby brother was dying 2 kilometers away, and there was nothing she could do except keep shooting people who were trying to finish the job. The rifle in her hand suddenly weighed 1,000 pounds. The scope felt like it was pressing against her eye socket with enough force to crack bone. Breathing became a conscious effort requiring concentration she did not have. Sarah, Doc's voice, distant and concerned. Sarah, I need you to stay with me. Focus on the mission. My brother is dying, Sarah heard herself say, the words coming from somewhere far away. Dylan is dying and I am sitting on a ridge watching through a scope. Doc moved beside her, his hand firm on her shoulder. Then we finish this faster. We create an extraction corridor. We get helicopters in here. We save all of them, including Dylan. But that only works if you can function. Can you function? Sarah dragged herself back to the present through sheer force of will. Yes. She chambered another round, found another target through her scope. Yes, I can function. The next hour was mechanical. Sarah fired when targets presented themselves. She relocated when Wagner Group started to triangulate her position. She coordinated with her team to maintain suppressive fire that kept the enemy from launching their final assault. And beneath every action, beneath every decision, was the knowledge that Dylan was bleeding out in a medical station that had maybe 30 minutes of supplies left and no way to evacuate casualties until someone created a path through 2,000 enemy fighters. Commander, Reaper's voice cut through her focus. I have identified the JSOC traitor. Sarah felt her tactical brain snap back to full awareness. Who? Colonel Nathan Garrison, JSOC operations officer. He has been with Wagner Group for at least 8 months. Deep cover penetration, FSB trained, probably graduated from their academy in the 90s. Reaper paused. His real name is Alexander Volkov. He is Alexei Volkov's brother. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. The ambush had been planned from inside JSOC. The stand-down order had been engineered to leave the SEALs trapped. And now the Volkov brothers, one in command at Fort Bragg and one in command in Afghanistan, were coordinating the final destruction of 480 Americans for money and revenge and whatever else motivated men who could betray their uniform. General MacArthur needs to know, Sarah said. Now, already transmitted, Reaper confirmed. CIA is moving to arrest Garrison at Fort Bragg. But Commander, Garrison knows about us. He has our positions, our communications protocols, everything. The moment CIA moves on him, he will warn his brother, and Wagner Group will come at us with everything. Then we need to move first. Sarah made the decision in less than a heartbeat. All Guardian elements, prepared to displace. We are moving to alternate positions. We have maybe 10 minutes before our current location gets hit by everything Wagner Group can throw at us. What about the SEALs? Prophet asked. If we displace, who covers their evacuation? We do. From a position Wagner Group does not know about yet. Sarah was already packing her gear, moving with the efficiency of someone who had done emergency exfiltrations too many times. We moved to the eastern ridge, higher elevation, better fields of fire, and closer to where helicopters can land for medevac. She paused. Dylan needs that medevac in less than 2 hours. We are going to make sure he gets it. The team displaced as a unit, moving through terrain that offered concealment but not cover, exposed for minutes at a time to any observer who knew where to look. Sarah led them through a route she had identified during their initial reconnaissance, a path that used dead ground and terrain masking to minimize visibility. They covered 3 kilometers in 20 minutes, arriving at the eastern ridge just as Wagner Group began shelling their previous position with mortars and artillery. From their new position, Sarah had a perfect view of the valley floor and the SEAL defensive perimeter. She could see the medical station where Dylan was fighting for his life. She could see Wagner Group massing for their final assault. And she could see, approaching from the north, 4 American Apache helicopters flying low and fast. Thunderflight, this is Guardian Actual, Sarah transmitted on the helicopter frequency. We have established Overwatch position. You are cleared hot on all targets bearing east of the SEAL perimeter. Danger close is not a concern. We will mark our position with infrared strobes. Guardian Actual, this is Thunder 1-1, the Apache flight lead responded. We have multiple anti-aircraft positions targeting our approach. We are taking fire. 2 birds hit, but still combat effective. Beginning attack run now. The Apaches opened up with a violence that redefined the battlefield. Hellfire missiles streaked from their weapons pods, each one finding a Wagner Group position and turning it into fire and shrapnel and screaming men. The 30mm cannons spoke with a sound like tearing fabric. each burst shredding vehicles and fortifications and anyone unfortunate enough to be in the open. Wagner Group tried to return fire. Their anti-aircraft weapons engaged, sending tracers and missiles toward the helicopters. One Apache took a hit to its tail rotor, began spinning, the pilot fighting for control. The helicopter auto-rotated hard, the crew somehow keeping it in the air long enough to limp beyond the effective range of ground fire before setting down in a controlled crash that was violent but survivable. 3 Apaches continued the assault. The valley floor became hell, every Wagner Group position targeted and destroyed with methodical precision. Sarah and her team added their fire to the chaos, eliminating anyone who tried to rally a defense or coordinate a response. The enemy broke. They had been professional soldiers fighting for money. Professionals knew when a battle was lost. They scattered, running for vehicles, running for the mountains, running anywhere that was not under the guns of aircraft that could see them through smoke and darkness and kill them before they knew they were targeted. Guardian Actual, Medivac is inbound. MacArthur's voice came through Sarah's radio. 4 MH-60s with medical teams. Get your brother and every other wounded man loaded. You have 20 minutes before Wagner Group regroups. Copy that. Sarah was already moving down the ridge toward the SEAL perimeter. Her team followed, providing security, watching for any Wagner fighters who might have stayed behind to spring one last ambush. They reached the defensive perimeter, and Sarah found herself surrounded by SEALs she had saved. Men who looked at her with expressions ranging from gratitude to awe to confusion about who exactly had been killing the enemy for the past day. Where is the medical station? Sarah asked the nearest SEAL, not recognizing him through the dust and blood. This way, the SEAL said, leading her through the perimeter to a bunker that smelled like antiseptic and blood and fear. Inside, wounded men lay on litters, some unconscious, some quietly suffering, all of them carrying injuries that would follow them forever. Dylan was in the back corner, his chest bandaged, an IV running to his arm, his face pale but his eyes open. He saw Sarah and for a moment did not recognize her through the combat gear and dust. Then his eyes focused and went wide. Sarah? His voice was weak but shocked. What are you doing here? Saving your life, Sarah said, kneeling beside him. She wanted to hug him, wanted to cry, wanted to tell him she had been terrified for the past hour. Instead, she checked his bandages, verified his IV, became the professional operator who evaluated wounded rather than the sister who had almost lost her baby brother. You are going to be fine. Medevac is 2 minutes out. They will take you to Landstuhl. You will have surgery. You will recover. You were the sniper team, Dylan said, understanding dawning. You have been out there for 18 hours killing Russians. You saved us. You saved me. We did what we had to do, Sarah stood, as the sound of helicopters became audible. Now you need to do what you have to do. Survive. Recover. Go home to Mom's grave and tell her I kept my promise to watch over you. Dylan grabbed her hand with surprising strength for someone who had been dying an hour ago. Thank you. He coughed, grimaced in pain. Thank you for not leaving us, for not leaving me. Never, Sarah said simply. I will never leave you. That is the promise. The medevac helicopters landed in a storm of dust and rotor wash. Medical teams poured out, combat medics who had done this too many times, who triaged with brutal efficiency, who loaded wounded with care that balanced speed against suffering. Dylan was carried out on a litter, his hand releasing Sarah's only at the last moment, his eyes saying things there was no time to speak. Sarah watched his helicopter lift off, watched it bank away towards safety, and felt something loosen in her chest. He would live. He would recover. She had kept the promise. Commander, Doc appeared beside her. We have a problem. Captain Riley is still here. His wound is worse than reported. The medics say he needs evacuation immediately, but all 4 medevac birds are full. There is no room. Sarah felt the universe testing her again. Jamie Riley, her father's godson, the man she had come here to save, was about to be left behind because there was no space on the helicopters. The arithmetic was simple. 53 wounded loaded across 4 helicopters. Riley made 54. Someone would have to stay behind. I will stay, a voice said from behind Sarah. She turned to find Lieutenant Commander Marcus Chen, the executive officer she had met during the extraction. I can wait for the next flight. Riley needs surgery more than I need comfort. Sir, Sarah began, but Chen cut her off. That is an order, Commander. Get Riley on a helicopter. I will hold the perimeter with the remaining effectives until you can send another bird. Chen smiled slightly. Besides, I have been shot at for 18 hours. Another hour or two will not make much difference. Sarah wanted to argue, but tactical reality overrode sentiment. Chen was right. Riley needed immediate surgery. Chen could wait. The calculus of triage was cruel but clear. Thank you, she said simply. They loaded Riley onto the last helicopter, his stretcher secured with webbing, his face gray with blood loss. Sarah leaned close enough to speak without shouting over the rotors. Your father and my father made a promise to watch over each other's families. I am keeping that promise. You are going home. Riley's eyes focused on her with difficulty. Who are you? Sarah Garrett, Tom Garrett's daughter, the one you used to call your annoying little sister. Riley tried to smile, failed. Get better, Jamie. Your dad will never forgive me if I let you die after all this. The helicopter lifted off. Sarah watched it go, watched all four birds disappear into the distance, carrying men she had saved. Men who included her brother and her father's godson, and dozens of others whose names she did not know, but whose lives she had preserved through 18 hours of continuous combat. Commander, Reaper's voice in her earpiece. I have confirmation from CIA. Colonel Garrison has been arrested at Fort Bragg. Full confession. He has been feeding Wagner Group intel for 8 months. Apparently his son was killed in a training accident that he blamed on JSOC leadership. This was revenge. His brother Alexei Volkov offered him money and an outlet for his anger. So he sold out 500 Americans because he was angry, Hawk said quietly. That is the evil we are fighting, not ideology, just personal grievance dressed up as principle. Just personal. And now it is over, Prophet added. We stopped him. We saved them. The Lord be praised. But it was not over. Sarah knew that even as she stood in the valley watching the sun climb toward noon, Garrison's arrest would not bring back the SEALs who had died before her team arrived. Dylan's chest wound would leave scars that surgery could not fix. Jamie Riley would spend months in rehabilitation. And somewhere in the mountains, Alexei Volkov was still alive, still free, still capable of planning revenge. All Guardian elements, MacArthur's voice came through. Extraction assets inbound for you. Mission complete. You are coming home. What about the 434 SEALs still here? Sarah asked. Chen and his men? Second wave extraction is 15 minutes behind your birds. Everyone is coming home, Sarah. Everyone. No one left behind. That was the promise. That is what you made possible. Sarah gathered her team, did a final weapons check, prepared for extraction. They had been on this ridge for over 20 hours. They had killed more enemy fighters than anyone would ever officially count. They had saved 480 men who should have died, and they had proven that sometimes the only way to follow orders was to refuse to follow orders. As they loaded onto the helicopter that would carry them to safety, Doc settled beside Sarah and spoke quietly. You did it. You saved your brother. You saved Jamie Riley. You saved all of them. We did it, Sarah corrected. This was never one person. The helicopter lifted off, leaving behind the valley where so much blood had been spilled. Sarah looked out at the Afghan mountains one last time, wondering if she would ever return, wondering if any of it had mattered in the long arc of history. But then she thought of Dylan in surgery, and Jamie recovering, and 480 men who would see their families again. And she decided that maybe history did not matter as much as individual lives saved one bullet at a time. The promise had been kept. The oath had been honored, and somewhere in the bureaucracy of the Pentagon, people were about to learn that acceptable losses were only acceptable until someone refused to accept them. The helicopter flew on toward safety, toward debriefing, toward all the complicated consequences of doing the right thing in defiance of orders. But for now, in this moment, Sarah let herself believe it had been worth it. All of it. The battle was over. The war continued. But 480 American warriors were alive to fight another day because 6 people had refused to let them die. That had to be enough. That was all there was. The promise kept. The oath honored. The burden carried all the way home. The helicopter rotors beat against the night air like the wings of some massive predator, each thump resonating through Sarah's chest as she crouched in the open door of the lead Black Hawk, watching the Afghan mountains slide past in shades of green through her night vision goggles. Behind her, 12 of the most critically wounded SEALs from Captain Riley's unit lay strapped to litters, their faces pale even in the artificial glow of the helicopter's interior lighting, IV bags swaying with each banking turn as the pilot pushed the aircraft through terrain that would kill them all if he miscalculated by even a few meters. They had gotten Riley out in the first extraction wave, his abdominal wound severe enough that the flight medic had looked at Sarah with eyes that said they were racing against time and time was winning. She had watched them load him onto the helicopter, had seen him try to speak through the morphine haze, had wanted to tell him who she was, but the chaos of combat had swept that moment away before words could form. Now she was returning to the valley floor, where 468 SEALs still fought for their lives against an enemy that had numbers and position, and the kind of patient malice that came from knowing your opponent was slowly bleeding out. The pilot's voice crackled through her headset. 3 minutes to LZ, we have company. 2 Wagner helos inbound from the north. Fast movers. Sarah Keeter Mike. Can you outrun them? Negative. They are Me-24s. Gunships. We are transport birds. They will shred us if they get a clean shot. Then do not give them a clean shot. Sarah checked her rifle, verifying the magazine was seated, and looked back at Doc Holloway, who was crouched beside her, with the same grim expression he wore when the universe was about to test whether they were as good as they thought they were. We are going to have to fight our way in. The Black Hawk dropped suddenly, the pilot throwing the aircraft into a dive that pressed Sarah against her restraints and made her stomach try to exit through her throat. They were flying nap of the earth now, using the terrain to break line of sight with the pursuing gunships. The rotor wash kicking up dust devils that obscured visibility and made the whole maneuver feel like controlled suicide. Through her night vision, Sarah could see the valley floor approaching fast. Too fast. The landing zone marked by infrared strobes that only showed up through American optics. The Wagner helicopters opened fire, tracer rounds stitching through the darkness like angry fireflies. The sound of heavy machine guns audible even over the Black Hawk's engines. The pilot jinked left, then right, the aircraft responding with an agility that transport helicopters were not supposed to possess. And Sarah realized their pilot was not just good, he was one of the crazy ones. The special operations aviators who flew like they were trying to break the laws of physics through sheer force of will. We are taking fire, the co-pilot reported with the kind of professional calm that suggested this was not his first rodeo with enemy gunships. Hydraulics holding, engines green. We are good. The Black Hawk flared hard, bleeding speed in a manner that made Sarah's vision tunnel briefly, and then they were on the ground, skids hitting dirt in a landing that was barely controlled chaos. The ramp dropped and she was moving, rifle up, scanning for threats, while the critically wounded were offloaded by SEAL corpsmen who worked with the desperate efficiency of people who knew the helicopter was a target and every second on the ground invited death. The Wagner gunships circled overhead like vultures, their searchlights sweeping across the valley floor, looking for a shot that would not hit their own forces. Sarah could see them clearly now, massive Soviet-era machines bristling with weapons, and she understood with perfect clarity that if those helicopters found a firing solution, everyone in the landing zone would die in the kind of violence that left nothing recognizable. We need to suppress those gunships, she shouted to Doc over the rotor wash. Get Hawk and Prophet, set up firing positions along the perimeter. Anything that flies gets engaged. Doc nodded and disappeared into the chaos of the landing zone where 468 SEALs were establishing a defensive perimeter that looked increasingly fragile against the massed Wagner forces, gathering for what everyone knew would be the final assault. Sarah could see it in the way the enemy moved, the methodical positioning of heavy weapons, the coordination that spoke of professional military training rather than the chaotic enthusiasm of insurgents. A figure approached through the darkness, moving with the careful gait of someone who was wounded but refusing to show it. Sarah recognized the posture before she recognized the face. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Chen, Team 7's executive officer, his left arm in an improvised sling, blood seeping through a pressure bandage on his thigh. You must be the angel sniper everyone is talking about, Chen said, his voice rough with exhaustion and pain. The one who saved our asses from that ridgeline. Just doing a job, Sarah replied, scanning the perimeter, watching the Wagner forces mass in the darkness beyond their defensive positions. Well, thank you for the job. Chen gestured toward the perimeter with his good arm. We have maybe 4 hours before they come at us with everything. They have been probing our lines, testing our ammunition reserves. They know we are running on fume. How bad is it? Ammunition at 20%. Medical supplies exhausted. Wounded at 42% of total force. We have been rationing everything, but mathematics does not lie. We cannot hold another major assault. Chen paused, his eyes tracking to the Wagner gunships circling overhead. And now they have air superiority. We are done unless extraction happens in the next 3 hours. Sarah felt the weight of that assessment settle across her shoulders. 3 hours, 468 men against 2,000 Wagner and Taliban forces with air support and heavy weapons. The arithmetic of survival did not favor them. Her radio crackled. "Commander Garrett, this is MacArthur. I need a status report." Sarah keyed her mic, moving away from Chen to speak privately. "General, we are on the ground. Casualties evacuated. Remaining force is 468 effectives, but that number includes wounded who can barely hold a rifle. Enemy has committed gunships. Our air support cannot operate in this environment." "I know," MacArthur said, and there was something in his voice that Sarah had never heard before. Something that might have been fear if generals were allowed to show such things. "I am watching satellite feed. Wagner is preparing for a final push. They will hit you at dawn. That gives you approximately 2 hours. 2 hours to extract 468 men under fire from air and ground." Sarah did the math and came up empty. "Sir, we need a miracle." "Miracles are why I send you," MacArthur replied. "Figure it out, Captain. Those men are depending on you." The transmission ended. Sarah stood in the darkness of the Afghan valley, surrounded by the sound of men preparing to die, and tried to find an answer that did not exist in any tactical manual she had ever read. You could not evacuate nearly 500 men from a hot LZ under fire from enemy gunships. The helicopters would be destroyed on approach. The men would be slaughtered during loading. It was the kind of scenario that showed up in after-action reviews as a case study in how not to plan an operation. Doc found her standing there, staring at the darkness where Wagner forces were gathering. His face was streaked with dust and gunpowder residue, his eyes red from 14 hours of continuous combat, but his hands were steady as he checked his rifle. "We have a problem," he said quietly. "Reaper is analyzing enemy communications. Wagner knows exactly what we are trying to do. They are positioning anti-aircraft weapons along every possible extraction route. The moment our helicopters show up, they get shredded." Sarah felt something cold and final settle in her chest. "They are smart, professional. They have fought Americans before. They know our doctrine." Doc nodded. "So we need a new doctrine, something they are not expecting." Sarah looked at the perimeter, at the defensive positions, at the massed Wagner forces beyond. An idea began to form. Terrible and desperate and probably suicidal. But it was an idea. We cannot extract from the valley floor. Wagner controls all the approaches. But what if we do not extract from here? Where else is there? Sarah pointed toward the ridgeline, 2 kilometers to the east. The same ridgeline where she and her team had spent 18 hours raining death on Wagner positions. It has elevation, it is defensible, and Wagner has abandoned it because they think we are staying put. Doc followed her gaze, understanding dawning slowly. You want to move 468 men, 42% of them wounded, 2 kilometers across open ground, up a mountain, while being pursued by 2,000 hostiles and attack helicopters. "Yes," Sarah said simply. "That is insane." Doc paused. "It might work, but it is definitely insane." "Do you have a better idea?" Doc thought for a moment, then shook his head. No, I do not." "When do we move?" "Now, before Wagner realizes what we are doing. We fight a rearguard action all the way to the ridge. We sacrifice speed for security. We carry the wounded. We leave nothing behind. And if Wagner catches us in the open, then we die fighting instead of die waiting." Sarah keyed her radio to the command frequency. "All Guardian elements, this is actual. We are moving to alternate extraction site. Collapse perimeter, prepare to displace in 5 minutes. Wounded evacuated first. Security elements provide covering fire. This is going to be close." She found Lieutenant Commander Chen and explained the plan. His face went through several emotions in quick succession, ending on something that might have been respect mixed with disbelief. "You are either a tactical genius or completely crazy," he said. "Right now I will settle for lucky," Sarah replied. "Get your men ready to move. We do not stop for anything. Anyone who falls behind dies behind." Chen nodded and started shouting orders. The SEAL perimeter began to collapse inward, teams of 4 carrying litters with the most severely wounded, other walking wounded supporting each other. The whole mass of humanity beginning to flow toward the eastern ridgeline like some massive organism trying to escape a predator. Sarah positioned herself at the rear of the movement, her team forming the rear guard along with the most combat-capable SEALs. Hawk set up on a slight rise, his rifle providing overwatch while the main body moved. Prophet and Gunny established firing positions to cover the flanks. Reaper stayed with the headquarters element, maintaining communications and monitoring enemy movements through intercepted radio traffic. The first Wagner probe came 15 minutes into the movement, a squad of 12 fighters moving to investigate why the American perimeter had shifted, probably expecting to find an opening they could exploit. They found Hawk instead, who eliminated 6 of them in under 30 seconds at ranges that made the survivors break and run. "Contact rear," Hawk reported calmly. "Threat neutralized." Sarah could see the main Wagner force beginning to realize something was wrong. Searchlights swept across the valley floor, finding nothing where hundreds of Americans should have been. Radio chatter increased, voices speaking Russian with the urgency of people who had just lost track of their prey. "They know we are moving," Reaper announced, intercepting orders to pursue and engage. "Enemy is mobilizing in strength. How long until they catch us?" 10 minutes, maybe less. Sarah looked at the column of SEALs struggling up the slope toward the ridge line. They were moving too slowly, the wounded slowing them down, the terrain working against them. 10 minutes might as well have been 10 seconds. Wagner would hit them in the open, on the slope, where there was no cover and no escape. "All security elements, we need to buy time." Sarah made the call that would cost lives but might save hundreds more. "We set up a blocking position here. Hold for 5 minutes, then fall back to secondary position. Leapfrog withdrawal all the way to the ridge." "Copy," came the replies from her team and the SEAL security elements who understood exactly what she was asking them to do. They dug in on a small rise that offered modest cover and excellent fields of fire. 28 men with rifles and machine guns and a handful of rockets, facing a Wagner force that Reaper estimated at 200 and growing. The mathematics were brutal, but simple. They needed to kill or suppress 200 enemy fighters long enough for 440 people to climb 2 kilometers of mountainside. The Wagner force came at them like a wave, professional fire and movement, using terrain intelligently, coordinating their assault with a precision that spoke of training and experience. Sarah settled behind her rifle and started picking off anyone who looked like they were giving orders or carrying heavy weapons. Hawk worked through targets with the methodical efficiency of someone who had done this so many times it had become routine. The other security elements opened up with everything they had, the volume of fire creating a barrier of lead that Wagner had to push through. The enemy came anyway. They lost men, but they came anyway because they had numbers and determination and the kind of tactical patience that eventually overwhelmed any defensive position through sheer attrition. Sarah watched them advance, watched her ammunition counter drop, watched the security elements take casualties, and knew they were buying minutes at the cost of lives. But those minutes might be the difference between survival and annihilation. "Fall back," she ordered after 5 minutes that felt like 5 hours. Next position, 200 meters upslope. The security elements disengaged, moving in bounds, covering each other, leaving behind 3 men who would not move again. Sarah felt each loss like a physical blow, but pushed the emotion away because there would be time for grief later, if there was a later. Right now, there was only movement and fire and the desperate mathematics of trading space for time. They repeated the process 3 more times, each blocking position, holding for a few minutes before falling back, each stand costing lives but buying precious time for the main column to reach the ridgeline. Sarah could see the main body reaching the crest, could see helicopters beginning to orbit beyond Wagner's anti-aircraft range, could see the possibility of survival taking shape if they could just hold a little longer. The 4th blocking position was where everything went wrong. A Wagner gunship found them, its searchlight pinning them against the mountainside, its weapon systems locking on with the kind of finality that made Sarah's blood turn cold. She saw the pilot adjusting his approach, saw the door gunner targeting, and knew they had maybe 3 seconds before that helicopter turned 28 men into scattered pieces. "Gunship! Break contact!" she screamed into her radio, but there was nowhere to break to, no cover deep enough to hide from an aerial platform with thermal imaging and heavy weapons. The gunship's weapons spun up, that distinctive sound of rotary cannons preparing to fire, and Sarah thought about Tyler, about her father, about promises made and promises about to be broken. She raised her rifle in defiance that was meaningless against armored aircraft, but it was all she had. And then something streaked up from the valley floor, a thin line of fire that connected earth to sky, and the Wagner gunship exploded in a fireball that lit up the night like a miniature sun. Sarah watched debris rain down, still not understanding what had happened, and then she saw them. Four American Apache helicopters, running dark and low, their targeting systems locked on the remaining Wagner gunship, which was now desperately trying to evade while the Apaches pursued with the single-minded focus of predators that had found prey. The second Wagner gunship lasted maybe 30 seconds before it too became falling wreckage. And then the Apaches were circling the battlefield, their mere presence causing the Wagner ground forces to break and scatter. Sarah's radio crackled. "Guardian Actual, this is Thunder Lead. General MacArthur sends his regards. We are here to provide close air support and cover your extraction. Where do you need us?" Sarah almost laughed, the sound coming out as something between a whine and a shout of triumph. "Thunder Lead, we have targets designated along the entire valley floor. Danger close is not a concern. Light them up." "With pleasure," the Apache pilot replied. And then the night turned into day as Hellfire missiles and 30mm cannon fire began systematically destroying every Wagner position visible from the air. Sarah got her people moving again, the security elements breaking contact and sprinting up the slope toward the ridgeline where Blackhawks were already landing to load the wounded. The Apaches circled overhead like guardian angels with guns, their presence transforming the battlefield from a place of death into something approaching hope. She reached the ridgeline and found Lieutenant Commander Chen coordinating the loading operation with the kind of desperate efficiency that came from knowing this was their last chance. The wounded went first, then the barely ambulatory, then everyone else in whatever order they arrived. Sarah counted heads, checked manifests, made sure no one was forgotten because the promise was simple and absolute. No one left behind. "Commander," Doc called from where he was supervising a group loading onto a Blackhawk. "We are short 3 men, security element from the 4th blocking position. They did not make it back." Sarah felt her chest tighten. "Who?" Doc read from his list. Petty Officer Marcus Webb, Petty Officer James Kowalski, Petty Officer David Nakamura. Last seen at Grid November Kilo 4728. Sarah looked at the valley floor where Apache gun runs were still tearing through Wagner positions, where fires burned and smoke obscured visibility. 3 men down there, probably dead, but she had to know. She keyed her radio to the frequency the security element had been using. "Webb, Kowalski, Nakamura, this is Guardian Actual. Report status." Silence. She tried again. "Any Guardian element, this is Actual. If you can hear me, respond." Still nothing. Chen appeared beside her. "Commander, we need to go. All helicopters are loaded. Wagner is regrouping. We cannot stay here." "We are missing 3 men," Sarah said. "We do not leave until we account for them." "They are dead," Chen said, not unkindly. "Look at that valley. Nothing could have survived what the Apaches did to it. We need to extract now while we can." Sarah looked at the valley, at the fires and destruction, and knew Chen was probably right. But probably was not the same as certainly, and the promise was absolute. "We do not leave until we know." She grabbed her rifle and started down the slope, back toward the 4th blocking position, back toward the place where 3 men had disappeared. Doc caught up with her, then Hawk, then Prophet, and Gunny and Reaper. Her whole team following her back into danger because that was what you did when someone might still be alive. "Thunder Lead, this is Guardian Actual," Sarah radioed to the Apache flight lead. "We are moving into the valley to search for missing personnel. Request you maintain overwatch." "Copy that, Guardian. Be advised we are tracking multiple enemy signatures regrouping beyond the main engagement area. You have approximately 10 minutes before they reorganize." "Understood." Sarah kept moving downslope, her night vision painting the devastation in shades of green. The 4th blocking position had been hit by at least 2 Hellfire missiles, the ground torn and smoking, bodies scattered in pieces that made identification difficult. She moved carefully, checking each one, looking for anything that might tell her if the missing 3 were among the dead. "Over here," Hawk called from a depression in the ground about 20 meters from the main impact site. Sarah found him kneeling beside 3 men who had somehow survived by taking cover in a dried stream bed that had protected them from the worst of the blast. Petty Officer Webb had a compound fracture of his leg and was unconscious. Petty Officer Kowalski was alert, but had severe burns on his arms and face. Petty Officer Nakamura was helping Kowalski apply field dressings with hands that shook from shock. "We thought you left us," Nakamura said when he saw Sarah. He was maybe 25, his face smudged with soot and blood. "We thought no one was coming back." Sarah knelt beside him. "We do not leave our people, ever. Can you walk?" "Yes, ma'am. All three of us can move if we help each other." "Then let us go home." Sarah called for a litter team, got Webb secured for transport, and started back up the slope with her team supporting the three survivors. Behind them, the valley continued to burn, and in the firelight, Sarah could see Wagner forces beginning to regroup, beginning to understand they had lost this battle, but might still get revenge if they moved fast enough. The team made it back to the ridgeline where the last Black Hawk was waiting, rotors turning, pilot visibly anxious about staying on the ground any longer. They loaded the three survivors, did a final head count, and Sarah was the last one to board, standing on the skid, looking back at the valley floor where so much blood had been spilled. Lieutenant Commander Chen grabbed her arm and pulled her aboard as the helicopter lifted off. 468, he shouted over the rotor noise. 468 souls extracted, not one left behind. Sarah collapsed into a seat, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was, how much her body hurt, how close they had all come to dying a dozen times in the last few hours. Around her, the Black Hawk was packed with SEALs who looked like they had fought their way through hell, which was not far from the truth. Some were sleeping, despite the noise. Others stared into space with the 1,000-yard stare that came from seeing too much death. A few were quietly crying in the kind of release that came when you realized you were going to live after accepting you were going to die. Doc settled beside her, his medic bag open as he checked her for injuries she had not noticed. "You did it," he said quietly. "You brought them all home." "We brought them home," Sarah corrected. "All of us. This was not one person, this was a team." Doc nodded, accepting the correction. "Your father would be proud. Hell, I am proud. That was the finest piece of soldiering I have seen in 33 years. Sarah looked out the helicopter door, at the mountains falling away below, at Afghanistan disappearing into darkness, at the war that would continue long after they left. She thought about the promise she had made, about the cost of keeping it, about the three men they had gone back for because the promise was absolute in admitting no exceptions. "We did what we had to do," she said finally. "What else is there?" Doc had no answer for that, and they flew on through the night, heading towards safety and debriefing and all the complicated aftermath that came from defying orders to do the right thing. But for now, in this moment, Sarah let herself believe it had been worth it. 468 lives saved. 3 more pulled from death when everyone else had written them off. The promise kept, the oath honored, the burden accepted and carried all the way home. Below them, Afghanistan continued its endless cycle of war and peace and war again, indifferent to American promises, unconcerned with American sacrifice. But somewhere in that indifference, 468 men were alive who should have been dead, and that had to count for something. That had to mean something. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to sleep, knowing she would fail, knowing the adrenaline and emotion were too strong. Behind her eyelids, she saw faces, the living and the dead, the saved and the lost, all of them witnesses to a night when impossible became possible through nothing more complicated than refusing to accept any other outcome. The helicopters flew on through darkness, carrying their cargo of wounded and exhausted warriors toward bases that would process them and aircraft that would carry them home. And in the lead helicopter, Sarah Garrett sat with her rifle across her lap and her team around her and tried to understand how she had survived when so many had not. There was no understanding it. There was only accepting it and carrying forward and trying to be worthy of the luck that had blessed her and the skill that had saved her and the promises that had driven her to places where reasonable people would have quit. She had not quit. Her team had not quit. And because they had not quit, 468 men would see their families again, would have futures that included more than a flag folded in a grave at Arlington. That had to be enough because it was all there was, the promise kept, the oath honored, the burden carried all the way home. All the way home. The lights of Walter Reed Medical Center burned against the Washington night like promises made in fluorescent and glass, each window a small declaration that healing was possible even when the body carried wounds that went deeper than flesh. Sarah stood in the parking lot watching those windows, her dress blue uniform crisp and uncomfortable after weeks of combat fatigues, the Navy Cross heavy against her chest in a way that had nothing to do with its actual weight. Inside that building, men were recovering from wounds that should have killed them, were learning to walk again, or see again, or simply exist again in a world that had tried very hard to erase them from existence. She had been back in the United States for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of debriefings and medical evaluations and carefully worded questions from officers who wanted to know how she had defied direct orders and somehow become a hero instead of a criminal. 3 weeks of sleeping in a bed that felt too soft, of eating food that tasted too rich, of existing in a world that seemed fundamentally disconnected from the reality she had left behind in those Afghan mountains. Tyler had run to her when she first came home, had wrapped his 6-year-old arms around her legs and cried with the kind of relief that children show when they do not yet understand how to hide their emotions. She had held him and tried to be the mother he needed, but part of her was still on that ridgeline, counting heads and making sure no one was forgotten. Part of her would always be there, she suspected, standing watch over promises made and kept. The automatic doors slid open with a mechanical sigh as she entered the hospital. The smell hit her immediately, that particular combination of antiseptic and cafeteria food and something else that might have been suffering or might have been hope, depending on how you chose to interpret it. She had visited wounded before, had done the ritual of showing up in dress uniform to say thank you and well done, and we are proud of you. But this was different. This time she was visiting men she had saved, men who existed in the present tense because of decisions she had made when the easier choice would have been to let them become past tense. General MacArthur was waiting in the lobby, looking older than his 63 years, the weight of command visible in the way he held himself. He wore a simple service uniform without the full regalia his rank entitled him to, and Sarah understood immediately that he was trying to be less of a symbol and more of a person. It did not quite work. 4 stars were 4 stars no matter how casually you wore them. Sarah, he said simply, and there was warmth in his voice that the military usually discouraged, but that men who had sent each other into combat earned the right to express. You look well, better than the last time I saw you. The last time he had seen her was in Qatar, climbing off a helicopter covered in dust and blood and the residue of decisions that would follow her forever. She had filed her after-action report, had submitted to 72 hours of debriefing, had answered every question with the kind of factual precision that avoided editorializing about the moral failures of leadership that had made the whole operation necessary. I feel like I have been sleeping for weeks, she admitted, trying to catch up on a debt I did not know I owed. MacArthur nodded, understanding in a way that only people who had done the same thing could understand. It does not go away. The tiredness. You just learn to carry it. He gestured toward the elevator. Riley is awake. The doctors say he is recovering well. The surgery was successful. He will be back to full duty in 6 months if he wants it. Does he know that it was me? MacArthur shook his head. None of them do. We kept your identity classified. Official story is that a special activities team happened to be in the area and provided support. Your name does not appear in any public documentation. Sarah felt something that might have been relief or might have been disappointment. She had wanted to tell Jamie herself, wanted to see his face when he understood that Tom Garrett's daughter had kept the promise her father had made all those years ago to always watch over Michael Riley's son. But operational security had other priorities, and personal satisfaction was not one of them. They rode the elevator in silence, the numbers climbing through floors dedicated to various types of trauma and recovery. MacArthur led her to the 4th floor, orthopedic and general surgery, where the wounds were serious but not immediately life-threatening. The hallway stretched ahead of them, lined with rooms containing men who had survived what should have killed them. MacArthur stopped outside room 417. Before you go in, there is something you should know. The Senate Armed Services Committee wants testimony. About the operation, about the decision to launch a rescue against Pentagon orders. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. What kind of testimony? The kind that ends careers, MacArthur said quietly. Deputy Secretary Pemberton is facing questions about why he ordered a stand-down. The families of those 468 men want to know why their loved ones were designated acceptable losses. The media has picked up the story. This is becoming political. And they want me to testify. They want someone to take the fall. MacArthur's jaw tightened. Pemberton is claiming I went rogue, that I exceeded my authority, that I risked a broader conflict with Russian forces for a rescue operation that had low probability of success. He wants me court-martialed. He wants you court-martialed. He wants this whole thing buried under national security classifications, so no one has to admit they were willing to let 500 Americans die for political convenience. What are you going to do? MacArthur smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. I am going to testify. I am going to tell them exactly what happened and why. And I am going to let them decide if following orders, when those orders are morally bankrupt, is really what we expect from our military leadership. They will destroy you, Sarah said. Probably. MacArthur put his hand on her shoulder, the gesture heavy with all the years of mentorship and trust and shared understanding of what service actually cost. But some things are worth being destroyed over. This is one of them. He left her standing in the hallway, his footsteps echoing away toward the elevator. Sarah took a breath, straightened her uniform, and knocked on the door to room 417. Come in, a voice called, weak but recognizable. Jamie Riley looked smaller in the hospital bed, diminished by the tubes and monitors and the pallor that came from blood loss and surgery, and bodies pushed past their design limits. But his eyes were clear when they focused on Sarah, and recognition flared immediately despite the years since they had last seen each other. Sarah? He tried to sit up, winced, settled back against pillows. What are you doing here? I thought you were still active duty, deployed somewhere that does not officially exist. I was, Sarah said, moving to stand beside the bed. I got back 3 weeks ago. I heard you were here. Thought I would visit. Jamie studied her face with the intensity of someone trained to read people for deception and danger. You look like someone who has been through something. Afghanistan? Cannot talk about it. The automatic response, the shield that classified operations provided against uncomfortable questions. Jamie laughed, which turned into a cough that made him grimace. Yeah, I get it. I just spent 10 days in a place that officially does not exist, doing things that officially did not happen. He paused, his expression shifting to something more serious. We got hit. Ambush. 500 of us surrounded by an army. We thought we were dead, and then someone started killing them. Sniper team. Maybe more than one team. They saved our lives. Sarah felt her throat tighten. She wanted to tell him, wanted to see his reaction, but the words stuck somewhere between intention and expression. Jamie continued, his voice getting stronger as he worked through the memory. Whoever they were the best I have ever seen. Shots from ranges that should not be possible. Precision that was almost supernatural. They held off an army for 18 hours. He looked at Sarah directly. The official report says it was a special activities team, but nobody I know in SAD shoots like that. Nobody shoots like that. Maybe they were just having a good day, Sarah offered, keeping her voice neutral. Or maybe, Jamie said slowly, they were someone who had a very personal reason to make sure we came home. Someone who understood what it meant to lose people and refused to let it happen again. The silence stretched between them, heavy with things unsaid. Sarah felt the weight of revelation pressing against her chest, the need to confess warring with the discipline that had kept her alive through 100 operations where talking too much meant dying. Your father, Jamie said quietly. He saved my dad in Fallujah. General MacArthur told me the story years ago, how Tom Garrett went back into a building that was about to collapse, pulled my dad out, got him to safety, how he died going back for 2 more Marines who did not make it. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. I always wondered if I could do the same, Jamie continued. If I would have the courage to go back, to risk everything for someone else. He gestured at the monitors and tubes connecting him to life. I got my answer. When the shooting started, when Wagner Group had us surrounded, I froze. I was terrified. I am a SEAL. I have been in combat dozens of times, and I froze. You were wounded, Sarah said. You led your men. You kept them alive until extraction. I kept them alive because someone else was willing to do the hard part. Someone else was willing to stand between us and death. Jamie's eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. Whoever that sniper team was, they were the real heroes. Not me, not any of us. We just survived because they were better at killing than Wagner Group was at surrounding us. Sarah felt the confession rising up, the need to tell him overwhelming the discipline. Jamie, I need to tell you something. Before she could continue, the door opened and Doc Holloway entered, carrying flowers that looked absurdly cheerful in the clinical environment. He stopped when he saw Sarah, smiled, then noticed the intensity in the room, and his expression shifted to something more guarded. Sorry, Did not mean to interrupt. Doc set the flowers on the side table. I was visiting the wounded from Guardian Element. Wanted to check on Captain Riley. You were there? Jamie asked, his attention shifting to Doc. In Afghanistan, the rescue operation? Doc glanced at Sarah, reading something in her face, then nodded slowly. I was there. Then thank you. Jamie's voice broke slightly. Thank you for coming back for us. Thank you for not leaving us to die. Doc moved to the bed, his face carrying the lines of a man who had seen this scene play out too many times. Son, we do not leave people behind. It is not complicated. You were in trouble. We came and got you. That is what we do. But who gave the order? Jamie asked. Pentagon said no rescue. They wrote us off. Who countermanded that? General MacArthur, Sarah said before Doc could answer. He refused to accept that 468 men were acceptable losses. He found people willing to go get you. And you were one of them, Jamie said. Not a question, but a statement of fact arrived at through careful observation and logical deduction. Sarah met his eyes and nodded once. I was one of them. Jamie stared at her for a long moment, emotions playing across his face too quickly to identify individually. Tom Garrett's daughter, you went into combat to save me, to save all of us. I went into combat to keep a promise, Sarah corrected. A promise that no one gets left behind. A promise my father believed in. A promise I believe in. He would be proud of you. Jamie's voice was rough with emotion. Your dad, he would be so proud. Sarah felt tears threatening and pushed them down through sheer force of will. She had not cried since the operation ended, had not allowed herself the release because once she started, she was not sure she could stop. I hope so. I try to be worthy of him. It is all I know how to do. Doc moved to Sarah's side, his presence solid and reassuring. Commander, we should let Captain Riley rest. Doctor's orders. No excitement. They said their goodbyes and left Riley to his recovery. In the hallway, Doc looked at Sarah with the kind of concern that came from knowing someone well enough to see past the armor. You did good in there. Telling him. He deserved to know. Did I? Sarah asked. Or did I just make it harder for him? Now he knows that the daughter of the man who saved his father was willing to die to save him. That is a lot of weight to carry. It is also the truth. Doc started walking toward the elevator, and the truth matters, even when it is uncomfortable. Especially when it is uncomfortable. They visited 6 more rooms that evening, each one containing a SEAL who had been in that valley, who had faced death and been pulled back by people they never saw and mostly did not know. Sarah did not tell them who she was, did not claim credit, just thanked them for their service and told them the nation was proud. It was what you said in these situations, the ritual words that acknowledge sacrifice without dwelling on cost. The last room held Petty Officer David Nakamura, one of the 3 men they had gone back for when everyone else had written them off. He was awake, his burns bandaged, his eyes bright with recognition when Sarah entered. You, he said immediately, you came back. You pulled us out when we were sure we were dead. Sarah nodded. We do not leave our people. I told you that. I did not believe it, Nakamura admitted. I thought it was just something officers said. Words without meaning. But you meant it. You risked your life to come back for 3 enlisted guys who were probably already dead. You were not dead, therefore we came back. Sarah kept her voice level, professional. The promise is absolute. It does not have exceptions for rank or probability or convenience. Nakamura looked at her with something approaching awe. My grandfather was in the Army, World War II. He told me stories about the men who kept their promises, who came back for the wounded even when it was suicide. I never thought I would meet someone like that. I thought those people only existed in history books. They exist anywhere someone decides that keeping promises matters more than staying safe. Sarah paused, then added quietly, your grandfather would be proud of you. You held your position, you did your job. You are the kind of person those World War II veterans were fighting to protect the right to exist. She left before emotion could overwhelm professionalism. Doc followed her into the hallway, and they walked in silence back to the elevator, back through the lobby, back out into the Washington night, where the city continued its endless cycle of politics and power, and people who made decisions that other people had to live with or die from. MacArthur was waiting by Sarah's car, his face illuminated by the parking lot lights, looking every day of his 63 years and then some. The hearing is in 2 days. Senate Armed Services Committee. They will ask hard questions. They will try to make you say that I forced you to go, that you were following orders, that you had no choice. What should I tell them? The truth, MacArthur said simply, that I asked, that you volunteered, that we both knew it was technically illegal and absolutely necessary. He smiled slightly. Let them figure out how to court-martial us for doing the right thing. It will be educational for them. 2 days later, Sarah sat in the Senate hearing room wearing her dress blues with the Navy Cross and the other ribbons that documented a career spent in places most Americans could not find on a map. The room was packed with media and family members and the kind of people who showed up when history was being made in real time. She could see MacArthur sitting at a separate table, his 4 stars gleaming under the television lights, his face composed in the way senior officers learned to be composed when everything was falling apart. The senators filed in with the kind of self-importance that came from being elected to positions of power. Senator Patricia Morrison, the committee chair, was a former Navy officer herself, which meant she understood both sides of the equation and would be harder to fool or flatter. She called the hearing to order with a gavel strike that echoed through the chamber like a judgment. Commander Garrett, Senator Morrison began, her voice carrying the kind of authority that did not require volume. You stand accused of willfully disobeying direct orders from civilian leadership. Orders that came from the Deputy Secretary of Defense himself. Orders that were lawful and properly communicated through the chain of command. How do you respond to these accusations? Sarah stood, her voice steady. Senator, I do not deny that I disobeyed orders. The orders were clear. I understood them completely. I chose to disregard them. A murmur ran through the chamber. Senators exchanged glances. This was not how these things usually went. Officers who had done what Sarah did typically claimed confusion or miscommunication or any of the dozen other face-saving explanations that let everyone pretend mistakes were made instead of choices. Senator Morrison leaned forward. You admit to disobeying lawful orders. You understand that as grounds for court-martial, for dismissal from service, possibly for criminal prosecution. Yes, ma'am, I understand completely. Sarah paused, gathering her thoughts, preparing to say things that could not be unsaid. But I would ask the committee to consider the nature of those orders. I was told to abandon 468 American servicemen to capture or death at the hands of enemy forces. I was told these men were acceptable losses. I was told their sacrifice was necessary for strategic reasons I was not authorized to question. And you questioned them anyway. No, ma'am. Sarah met the senator's eyes directly. I did not question them. I rejected them. There is a difference. Senator Morrison's expression was unreadable. Explain that difference. Questioning an order suggests uncertainty about whether it should be followed. I had no uncertainty. The order to abandon those men was lawful in the technical sense. It came from properly constituted authority. It was transmitted through correct channels, but it was morally bankrupt. And I will not follow orders that require me to betray the fundamental promise we make to everyone who wears this uniform. The chamber erupted. Senators called for order. Media scrambled to get the quote correct. Family members of the rescued SEALs stood and applauded until security asked them to sit. Sarah stood at attention, waiting for the chaos to subside, feeling the weight of what she had just said settle across her shoulders like a physical burden. When order was restored, Senator Morrison spoke again, her voice harder now. Commander, you are aware that civilian control of the military is a cornerstone of our democratic system. You are aware that officers do not get to pick and choose which orders to follow based on their personal moral calculations. You are aware that what you are describing is the path to military dictatorship. With respect, ma'am, I disagree. Sarah chose her words carefully. Civilian control of the military is essential. I accept that completely. But civilian authority is not absolute. It is bounded by law, by treaty, by the Constitution, and by the moral obligations we inherit when we ask people to serve. The order to abandon those 468 men violated every one of those boundaries. Senator Harold Thompson, a conservative from Texas who had never served but loved military imagery, jumped in. So you are saying you know better than the Deputy Secretary of Defense. You, a lieutenant commander, have better judgment than civilian leadership confirmed by the Senate. No, sir, I am saying I was willing to stake my career and my freedom on a different calculation. Deputy Secretary Pemberton calculated that attempting rescue would risk more lives and create political complications in an election year. I calculated that leaving those men to die would destroy something more important than political convenience. What could possibly be more important than the democratic process? Thompson's voice carried the kind of scorn that politicians used when they thought they had scored a point. The promise, Sarah said simply, the promise that we do not abandon our own, the promise that service means something beyond political calculation, the promise that when you send Americans into combat, you move heaven and earth to bring them home. She paused, then added quietly, that promise is the only reason anyone volunteers to serve. Take it away and you have nothing but a mercenary force held together by paychecks and compulsion. The hearing continued for 4 more hours. Senators asked variations of the same questions. Sarah gave variations of the same answers. MacArthur testified and took full responsibility while making it clear that Sarah had volunteered and could have refused. Deputy Secretary Pemberton testified and defended his decision with appeals to strategic necessity and resource allocation and acceptable risk matrices. In the end, the committee was split. Half wanted Sarah court-martialed as an example that insubordination would not be tolerated. Half wanted her promoted as an example that moral courage still mattered. The compromise was that she would face no criminal charges, but would be asked to resign her commission with full honors. Sarah accepted the decision without protest. 3 weeks later, she stood in a small ceremony at Fort Bragg and was formally separated from the Navy with a retirement ceremony that included MacArthur pinning another medal to her chest and speaking words about service and sacrifice that the media dutifully reported and most people immediately forgot. 18 months after that ceremony, Sarah stood in a different kind of room. This one was not a hearing chamber or a hospital ward, but a training facility where the next generation of special operations soldiers learned their craft. She wore civilian clothes now, consultant badge on a lanyard, contractor status that gave her access without accountability. MacArthur had arranged it one of his last acts before retiring himself and moving into a position at a Washington think tank where he could advocate for military reform without the constraints of uniform. The room held 40 people, all special operations qualified, all volunteers for a new program that was still being defined. Sarah stood at the front beside a screen showing a map of Afghanistan and prepared to teach a class on something that had no name yet, but that everyone understood was important. What you are going to learn here does not appear in any manual, she began. It is not doctrine. It is not policy. It is older than both and more important than either. She clicked to the next slide, which showed a simple phrase: no one left behind. This is not a slogan. This is not a recruiting poster. This is a promise that defines who we are and what we do. She looked at the faces watching her, seeing in them the same mixture of idealism and cynicism that she had carried at their age. Some of you are here because you believe in this promise. Some of you are here because you want to be the best. Some of you are here because you do not know what else to do with your life except serve something bigger than yourself. All of those are good reasons. She clicked through slides showing operational scenarios, tactical problems, situations where the easy choice was to cut losses and the hard choice was to keep promises. This program exists because 18 months ago, 468 men were designated acceptable losses. Civilian leadership decided they were too expensive to save. They were wrong. Sarah told them the whole story, leaving out nothing except the classified details that were none of their business. She told them about MacArthur's call, about the decision to go, about 18 hours on a ridgeline killing Russians and Taliban to buy time for men who did not know they were being saved. She told them about the extraction and the desperate fight up the mountainside and the 3 men she had gone back for when everyone else assumed they were dead. The oath we take is not complicated, she concluded. We promise to defend the Constitution. We promise to follow lawful orders. But underneath those promises is a deeper one. We promise each other that we will come when called, that we will stand when others run, that we will be the kind of people who can be trusted with life and death and the terrible burden of deciding which is which. A hand went up in the back, a young officer with the kind of fresh-faced enthusiasm that combat had not yet beaten out of him. Ma'am, what if the cost is too high? What if saving one person means risking 10 others? Then you make a choice and you live with it. Sarah met his eyes directly. No one can make that choice for you. No manual will give you the answer. You have to decide what kind of person you are and what kind of promises you can keep. But I will tell you this, I have lived with a lot of choices, The ones that haunt me are not the times I risk too much. They are the times I risk too little. She taught that class for 6 weeks. 40 students cycling through a curriculum that was part military history, part moral philosophy, and part practical instruction in how to plan and execute rescue operations that everyone else called impossible. At the end, 38 of them passed. 2 dropped out, deciding this kind of service was not what they signed up for. Sarah respected that decision. Not everyone could be the kind of person who went back into fire for strangers. On the last day of class, General MacArthur attended the graduation ceremony. He wore a simple suit now, no uniform, no stars, just another citizen with strong opinions about how the military should operate. But when he stood to address the graduating class, everyone in the room came to attention out of habit and respect. "What you have learned here will save lives," MacArthur said. "It will also cost some of you everything. That is the trade. You become the kind of person who can be trusted with impossible promises. And in return, you accept that keeping those promises will take everything you have and probably more than you thought you could give." He looked at Sarah, standing at the side of the room. "Commander Garrett taught you how. Now you have to decide if you will. No one can make that choice for you. But I will tell you what I told her 18 months ago when I asked her to save 468 men. Some things are worth any price. Some promises are worth any sacrifice. Find those things, make those promises, and become the kind of person who keeps them no matter what." The ceremony ended. Students dispersed to assignments that would take them to every corner of the globe. Sarah stood in the empty classroom looking at the map of Afghanistan that still hung on the wall and wondered if what they were building would survive contact with reality. MacArthur joined her, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. "It will work," he said, reading her doubt. "Because it has to work. Because we need people who understand that some promises are absolute." "Do you really believe that?" Sarah asked. "After everything? After Pemberton tried to destroy us? After the Senate could not decide if we were heroes or criminals?" "I believe it because I saw it." MacArthur gestured at the empty seats where students had sat and learned and changed into something different than what they were before. "I saw you go back for those 3 men when everyone else said they were dead. I saw you risk everything for a promise. That matters. That will always matter, regardless of what politicians decide." They walked out of the building together into sunlight that felt too bright after hours in a classroom. Tyler was waiting by Sarah's car, now 8 years old, wearing a Little League uniform, looking exactly like his grandfather had looked at that age if photographs could be trusted. "Mom," Tyler called, running to her. "Did I miss it? Did you finish teaching?" Sarah caught him up, swung him around, held him close. "You did not miss anything important. Just adults talking about boring work stuff." "Was it about Grandpa Tom?" Tyler asked, because he had learned the truth somewhere along the way, had figured out that his mother was the kind of person who kept promises his grandfather had made. "It was about keeping promises," Sarah said, "which is what Grandpa Tom was best at, which is what I try to be good at, which is what I hope you will be good at when you are old enough to make promises that matter." Tyler nodded seriously, processing this in the way children process truths that are too big for their current understanding, but that will make sense later when they need them to. "Can we get ice cream? Keeping promises is hungry work." Sarah laughed, the sound surprising her with its genuineness. "Yes, we can get ice cream. That is a promise I can definitely keep." They drove away from Fort Bragg, away from the classroom where the next generation was learning lessons paid for in blood and sacrifice, away from the weight of history and toward the simple promise of ice cream and afternoon sunlight and the kind of normal life that people who kept impossible promises rarely got to enjoy. But for today, for this moment, Sarah let herself believe that maybe there was space for both. Maybe you could be the kind of person who went back for 3 men everyone else had abandoned, and also be the kind of person who kept promises to 8-year-old boys about ice cream. Maybe those two things were not contradictory but complementary, 2 sides of the same commitment to being someone who could be trusted when trust mattered most. MacArthur watched them drive away, his phone already ringing with the next crisis, the next impossible situation, the next time someone would need people who refused to accept acceptable losses. He answered it knowing what would be asked, knowing what he would have to arrange, knowing that somewhere there were more men who needed saving and that he would find people willing to do the saving. Because that was what they did. That was what they had always done. That was the promise that mattered more than policies or politics, or the careful calculations of people who had never stood on a ridgeline and decided that 500 lives were worth any price. The promise endured. The oath was honored. And in classrooms and forward operating bases and 1,000 other places where Americans served, the next generation was learning that some things were worth keeping no matter what the cost. The promise of never leaving anyone behind. The oath to stand between the innocent and danger. The commitment to be the kind of person who could be trusted when everyone else failed. It was enough. It had to be enough, because it was all there was and all there ever would be. The promise kept, the oath honored, the burden carried forward into whatever future awaited. Always forward, always faithful, always bringing everyone home, no matter what it cost, no matter how impossible the odds, no matter what the politicians decided or what the after-action reports said or what history would ultimately judge. The promise was absolute, the oath was sacred, and somewhere Tom Garrett's daughter was teaching his grandson about ice cream and sacrifice and the beautiful, terrible burden of being someone who kept their promises even when the world conspired to make breaking them the easier choice. It was enough. It had always been enough. It would always be enough. The story continued. The promise endured. And in the end, that was all that mattered.